Chapter 358. After the two of them disappeared, a soft swoosh rang out, followed by a strong gust of wind. Under the speed of Boundary's negation, which was 15 times that of supersonic speed, Feng Xingjian's influence on the surroundings was too great. The air was pushed apart, seething intensely like steam. Strong gales howled, turning into rows of shock waves that sent countless bookshelves flying. Boom, boom, boom sounds rang out incessantly in the sky, and Feng Xingjian flew several hundred meters into the air, bringing along streams of white gas. At a speed of 15 times that of supersonic speed, it was as if the entire world had come to a standstill in his eyes. The air was as viscous as mercury, and with each step he took in the air, layers and layers of ripples would be created. Air currents would then explode, propelling Feng Xingjian forward. With each step he took, the air would explode, as if there was a violent clap of thunder. White air currents would spread out in all directions, and Feng Xingjian would usually appear several hundred meters away. With Feng Xingjian's current physical attributes, he could easily create air explosions with his steps and fly at supersonic speed. The academy was only over 10 kilometers away from the great western city. With Feng Xingjian's flying speed, he would only need a few seconds to reach there. However, these few seconds were sufficient for these two conferred knights, who specialized in high speed, to engage in a series of open and covert fights. Anderson darted out from a lump of shadows, lifted his head, and threw a glance at the white gas cutting across the sky. He let out a cold laugh in his heart and once again leaped into the shadows. Although Feng Xingjian's speed was very fast, Anderson had absolute confidence in his long-distance movements. He continued to flash between shadows, and with each flash, he would cross a distance of several hundred meters. With each flash, other than his own reaction time, the flash itself did not take up any time at all. However, as he had to move at high speed, Anderson did not have the time to extend out his shadow domain. He could only keep on darting through the existing shadows. This meant that he was unable to move in a straight line and could only keep on leaping among the existing shadows. His path of advance was a kind of zigzag. Under such circumstances, Anderson was still extremely fast, pulling away from Feng Xingjian bit by bit. After leaping out from the shadows once again, Anderson threw a glance at Feng Xingjian, who was lagging behind in the sky, and smiled inwardly. As long as he made a few more leaps, he would be able to enter the great western city. At this moment, a loud sound came from the sky, but the speed of the sound was not fast enough to reach Anderson's ears, so he did not see the shocking scene in the sky. Feng Xingjian activated the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, and his entire body was instantly encompassed by countless scales. Many white acceleration fields kept on flashing, and explosive powers kept on ringing out in Feng Xingjian's body. The level 29 set possessed half of the strength of the Sand Country's national hero, Damarov. However, Feng Xingjian had never been able to suppress Damarov's will, so he could not fully unleash this power. However, during this period of time, Feng Xingjian's synchronization rate had reached 40%, and his cultivation had increased explosively. At this moment, after Feng Xingjian activated the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, he unleashed 10% of the level 29 national hero, Damarov, when he was still alive. In that instant, several hundred air currents exploded in the sky. These were the trajectories left behind by Feng Xingjian's continuous stomps on the air. Under the high-speed friction, the air emitted an extremely high temperature, and white steam kept on coming out from Feng Xingjian's entire body. At this moment, Feng Xingjian's speed had already surpassed that of Anderson, who was only depleting his reaction time. Bringing along a series of air explosions, Feng Xingjian appeared 200 meters above the restaurant. His body came to an abrupt stop, and the flesh all over his body trembled violently. To come to an abrupt stop while moving at such a high speed was equivalent to him attacking himself over 10 times at full power. However, with the effects of the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces which had strengthened his body after he reached level 23, he managed to hold on and only suffered slight internal injuries. However, even though he had stopped at a distance of 100 meters, the prowess of this extreme speed was still too great. Strong gales came gushing down, covering up Feng Xingjian's silhouette. Amidst everyone's screams and shouts, Feng Xingjian walked past the restaurant lightly, took a piece of Vulcan grilled meat, and left behind a golden button. Then he soared up into the sky once again, flying in the direction of the regional academy. After activating the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, Feng Xingjian's strength broke through his limits. With the help of countless supporting force fields, his speed reached an unprecedented level. By the time Andrewson returned to the library, Feng Xingjian had already eaten half of the Vulcan grilled meat in his hand. Andrewson crushed the grilled meat in his hand and said, "How can you be so fast? What power did you use at the end?" "Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor," Feng Xingjian said calmly. "You've been in seclusion for too long. Many things are no longer the same as 2 months ago." Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor? To think that it's the power of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor? They gave this set of superior divine weapon to you as a reward? Andrewson's brows twitched. He clearly knew of the great name of this set of armor. However, it was only now that he knew that Feng Xingjian was in possession of this set of armor. Feng Xingjian said, "Since you've lost, then I'll have to trouble you for the next half a year." Andrewson was so infuriated that he panted heavily for a few seconds before he slowly held it in. A proud and arrogant genius like him would naturally keep his word and would not be willing to go back on his word easily. However, at the thought of having to run errands for Feng Xingjian for half a year, his chest started to heave up and down intensely again. Feng Xingjian continued, "I don't usually need your help. It's mainly for Ferdinand and Zhou Xingwen. There might be times when conferred knights will need to step in. Even so, they can't disturb my cultivation." "I know that." Feng Xingjian smiled and said, "I'll give you a salary of 3,000 gold every month. I won't let you work for nothing, and I won't let you waste too much of your time either." A salary of 3,000 gold every month was considered a very good income for a conferred knight. It was even more so for a conferred knight like Andrewson, who had just completed the second transition. He threw a few glances at Feng Xingjian and said, "When did you become so rich? I've said it before. You've missed out on too much in the past 2 months." Feng Xingjian then gave Andrewson his contact details and the address of Ferdinand and the others before he once again immersed himself in scanning the library. After Andrewson left the library, he casually grabbed a maid and started asking her about what had happened in the past 2 months. The matter regarding Feng Xingjian had been too big, and even the maids had a rough idea of what had happened. As Andrewson listened, his expression changed drastically. This was especially so when he heard that even the Holy Orison had supported Feng Xingjian's rebirth sword technique. His eyes opened wide, filled with disbelief. To think that such a big thing has happened. Anderson gave it some thought. The first thing he wanted to take a look at was the rebirth sword technique. On the other hand, the restaurant seemed to have gone through a tempest. Although Feng Xingjian had tried his best to reduce his speed, the strong gales caused by his movements had still blown away many things in the restaurant. Diana grew afraid. She looked at the messy restaurant and felt extremely puzzled. What on earth is going on? Why is there suddenly a strong gust of wind? Just then, there seemed to be a flash of golden light before her eyes. She walked over, squatted down, and picked up a golden button. Mother didn't bring this away? Seriously, she's too careless. Chapter 359. It was the end of September, the 3rd month since Feng Xingjian had entered the regional academy. With Anderson's help, Feng Xingjian was able to focus more on his cultivation. This was especially so after Feng Xingjian had scanned through all the killing techniques in the library. After returning to the sacred land, he continued to read through the killing techniques in his mind, searching for sword techniques that could be synthesized into the Zenith Light Sword Formation, Ether Sword Ripples, or the Prodigious Demolition Sword. The Flying Heavens Sword technique uses the tracks formed by ether particles to accelerate the magnetic field. A speed-type killing technique. Fang Xingjian recalled this top-notch killing technique in his mind. There was no lack of killing techniques that could increase one's speed. This was especially so for the Soaring Heavens sword technique, which was one of the top-notch killing techniques. It was a powerful killing technique that many people would spend several years or over 10 years researching. Unless some killing techniques were really special, Fang Xingjian would still choose to cultivate top-notch killing techniques, just like the Soaring Heavens sword technique that he was currently recalling in his mind. With the point of his sword finger, Fang Xingjian began to inscribe the flying Apsara's sword art on the stone slab. In the days that followed, other than tempering his attributes, cultivating his waves and mental cultivation method, he continued to flip through the sword techniques in the library, searching for suitable sword techniques to cultivate to the maximum level and then synthesizing them into the Zenith Light Sword Formation, Ether Sword Ripples, or the Prodigious Demolition Sword. The second level of the Mystical Prince allowed his cultivation speed to increase once again, and his synchronization rate of over 40% also allowed his success rate of skill synthesis to reach over 40%. This allowed his sword arts to improve rapidly in the following days. However, although the synthesis had been successful many times, increasing the prowess, speed, accuracy, and other aspects of the sword technique, Fang Xingjian could not be bothered to change the names. He still kept the three techniques as the Zenith Light Sword Formation, Ether Sword Ripples, and Prodigious Demolition Sword. Just like that, half a month passed by in a flash. Fang Xingjian spent most of his time cultivating in the Sacred Land. When he was free, he would go to the Killing Techniques Palace to cultivate his heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces and strengthen his body. Sometimes, when he was craving for food, he would head to the barbecue shop in the great western city to have a taste of the Vulcan barbecue. Anyway, with his speed, it would take him less than a minute to travel more than 10 kilometers. It was no different from walking in his own backyard. Of course, the Heaven's Volition sword intent also needed to be constantly fed with sword techniques. However, he had scanned through all the killing techniques and sword techniques in the library, so he did not have to worry about this. Over the past half a month, coupled with the continuous training he had done over the past month, his waves had leveled up once again. The prodigious astral divine powers waves was now at level 4. By the beginning of October, Fang Xingjian's strength had increased by leaps and bounds again. His attributes had become: name, Fang Xingjian; age, 17; occupation, heavenly sword sovereign level, level 23; strength, 149 plus 10 agility, 233 plus 10 reaction, 131 endurance, 108 flexibility, 107 ether synchronization rate. 47%. The attributes above come into effect once the prodigious astral divine powers waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 10 in strength attribute. Techniques: boundaries negation, level 40 rebirth sword technique, level 40 new 9-headed dragon sword technique, level 40 zenith light sword formation, level 40 ether sword ripples, level 40 prodigious demolition sword, level 4 ether divine art, Heaven's Volition sword intense specialties, genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, heightened reflex, perfect muscles, single sword world subjugation, elementary berserkness, unparalleled sword intent, apex, sword bones, swordless path, darkness sword sense, heavenly sword imprint waves. Level 4 prodigious astral divine powers waves mental cultivation method. Level 6 universal sword dominance lunisolar. On this day, after Fang Xingjian finished cultivating his sword arts, he soared to the sky once again, stomping on the air and flying in the direction of the great western city. Along the way, he sensed the increasing pressure coming from the surrounding atmosphere. As his speed increased, the air resistance grew stronger as well. Although Fang Xingjian's agility attribute had increased once again, his running speed did not increase by much. Fang Xingjian thought to himself, "There's still a limit to the speed in the atmosphere. If this were to continue, the effects of my agility attribute would also become increasingly weaker." Deep rumbling sounds rang out incessantly from the sky. "Diana, who was in the barbecue shop, frowned and looked out of the window. "Why is it that there's only thunder and no rain lately?" The maid next to her smiled and said, "Lady Boss, young Master Fong is here again." Diana lifted her head, looked at Fong Xingjian, who had just entered from the door, and said, "So what if he's here?" Hee, this young Master Fong is really infatuated with her. He comes over every 3 to 4 days. A button made of gold. If I were the lady boss, I would have given in to him long ago. Diana said unhappily, "You don't want to work anymore, do you?" She touched the gold button in her arms. Her mother had already gotten someone to appraise it, and the button was indeed made of gold. Thinking of this, Diana walked out of the barbecue shop and walked up to Fong Xingjian. She placed a total of 2 buttons before Fong Xingjian. "This is too valuable. I can't accept it." Fong Xingjian looked at Diana's solemn expression and said, "I like your barbecued meat. They're worth this price." "How can the barbecued meat be worth so much money? You could take it back." Diana smiled and shook her head. "If you like it, you could just come here more often." Just then, the door of the barbecue shop was pushed open once again, and Diana's mother walked in. When she saw how Fong Xingjian was talking to Diana, a hint of wariness flashed in her eyes. She tugged at the young man behind her and said, "Louis, come over quickly. Diana is here too." The young man was wearing a night attire and had a slightly cold expression on his face. When he saw the oil stains and smoke in the barbecue shop, he frowned a little. However, when he saw Diana, who was wearing a chef's uniform and had her hair tied up in a ponytail and had an exquisite figure, he smiled. "Diana, your mother and I have specially come over to take a look at you." The two of them walked up to Fong Xingjian and Diana. The young man, Louis, threw a glance at Fong Xingjian and asked, "Diana, is this your friend?" Diana's mother immediately said, "He's not a friend. He's just a customer. He likes to eat the barbecued meat that Diana makes." "Ha! Diana's barbecued meat is really delicious." Diana threw a glance at her mother a little impatiently and asked, "Louis, why are you free to come over? Why? Don't you welcome your childhood friend like me? Eat the meat first. Don't disturb my business." Diana shook her head. Not long later, 3 servings of barbecued meat were served. Fong Xingjian ate silently, occasionally revealing a hint of a smile. Diana's mother threw a curious glance at Fong Xingjian. This was the first time she had met this legendary young Master Fong. This young man, she threw a glance at Fong Xingjian and asked, "You like to eat Diana's barbecued meat? You're a knight apprentice?" "No." "Then you're a knight?" Diana's mother asked curiously. Although Fong Xingjian seemed to be very rich, she was not willing for Diana to find a profligate young master. If he was a knight, then he would be a good match. "This kid comes here often, so he's quite sincere. To be able to use gold to make buttons, his family must be very rich. It'd be great if he's also a knight." Sigh, if he's not a knight, no matter how rich he is, there'll come a day when he'll be squandered. Only by becoming a knight will he be able to stand above the masses and protect his family's assets. "No." Hearing Fong Xingjian's reply, Diana's mother let out a slight sigh. She decided to advise Diana to not let the young lady be dazzled by Fong Xingjian's money. Fong Xingjian was not even a knight apprentice, which meant that he did not cultivate martial techniques at all. How was he going to survive in this world? Chapter 360. When Louis heard Fong Xingjian's reply, he immediately felt that the threat had been resolved. He smiled calmly and said with a hint of pride, "Young man, it won't do for you to not cultivate martial arts. I'm a teacher at the Great Western City's Prefectural Academy. If you wish to learn, I can introduce you to our apprentice class." As the center of the Great Western region, the Prefectural Academy was naturally the best in the entire Great Western region. Moreover, with the support of the Great Western region's aristocrats, the Academy had even set up apprentice classes for knight apprentices to cultivate. For Louis to be able to become a teacher in this academy, his abilities and talent were naturally not bad. It also represented a certain status and future. Therefore, when Louis said these words, he slightly puffed out his chest. Diana's mother also said, That's right. Men must learn some martial arts to protect themselves. In her opinion, this was to make Fang Xingjian back off in the face of difficulties. However, Fang Xingjian did not pay them any heed. He finished a plate of 5 jin of roasted meat in a few bites, raised the plate, and said another 5 jin. Louis frowned as he looked at Fang Xingjian, feeling that he was a little stubborn. However, he did not say anything and continued to eat the roasted meat quietly, thinking about where he should ask Diana out later. Diana's mother casually said a few words and then ran to the barbecue counter to talk to Diana. Diana, let me tell you, you're definitely not allowed to get together with that young Master Fang. What nonsense are you spouting? Diana controlled the temperature of the roasted meat, and a hint of a smile appeared on her beautiful face. I don't even know what his name is. The male customers at the side all looked at Diana's smile without blinking. Louis also stared at Diana, his eyes flashing with intense admiration. It's better if you don't know, Diana's mother said in a soft voice. Don't be fooled by how rich he is. We're from a small family, and we'll be at a disadvantage if we look for aristocrats. Moreover, he doesn't even cultivate martial arts and won't be able to become a knight. In the future, no matter how much wealth he has, he won't be able to protect himself. Diana said helplessly, Mother, what nonsense are you spouting? Leave quickly. Don't disturb me while I'm cooking the roasted meat. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm doing this for your own good. Do you really want to be a barbecue man for the rest of your life? Diana's mother said exasperatedly, I don't understand. What's so bad about Louis? He's a level 19 knight and a teacher in the Great Western City's Prefectural Academy. I heard that he earns over 50 gold every month. Moreover, he was only 20 years old this year and would have a lot of time to cultivate in the future. He might even become a conferred knight in 10 or 20 years' time. By then, you will be the wife of a conferred knight. Diana rolled her eyes at her mother and said, All right, Mom. If you keep talking like this, I'm going to run away from home. Louis and I don't suit each other. I just treat him as an older brother. Putting aside the mother and daughter's soft conversation on the barbecue table, Fang Xingjian ate his meat quietly. Louis did not have much to say to him either, so he ate his own barbecue meat. In his opinion, other than the fact that the other party might be richer than him, he was superior in every other aspect. Moreover, although Diana and her mother had spoken softly, how could they possibly escape the ears of a knight like him? Therefore, there was no need for him to say anything. He believed that the other party would back off in the face of difficulties before long. The two men covered their heads as they ate their roasted meat. It was as if the roasted meat before them was the only thing that could attract their attention. Diana and her mother continued to stand at the barbecue table, talking about something. Diana always appeared to be impatient, while her mother was always trying to persuade her. At this moment, the door of the barbecue shop was pushed open again. A middle-aged man with a shaved head and ragged clothes slowly walked in. He randomly found a seat and sat down. With an impatient face, he shouted, Where's the food? Hurry up and serve the food. The man had a ferocious expression, and ordinary waitresses did not dare to get close to him. Diana frowned and said, Mary, go and take care of the customer. Thankfully, the man was only a little fierce in his words. After ordering 20 jin of Vulcan grilled meat, he started to eat crazily. His table manners were very unsightly and barbaric, as if he had not eaten meat for several decades. Basically, he would tear off 2 or 3 tails of meat with just a casual pull and stuff them into his mouth. After chewing a few times, he would swallow them. The young Prefectural Academy teacher, Louis, looked at the fierce-looking man with wariness in his eyes. His gaze swept past the man's calves, thighs, waist, and the lines of his back muscles, and his gaze turned even grimmer. From his gaze, the movements of the man's muscles were like the undulations of mountains, and a surge of power that was like that of a huge dragon was circulating incessantly in the man's body. This man is an expert. Suddenly, he looked at the man's clothes and could faintly see a blue mark. It was the mark of a prison. He stood up slowly and sent a message to Diana using his reduced force field. This guy is a fugitive and might be a knight-level expert. You should quickly leave with Andy. Diana's countenance changed, and she said to her mother, Mother, You should go out for a while. Go out? Why do you want me to go out? I've already said that I'm doing this for your own good. Go out for a while. I'll be back in a while. What do you want to say outside? Just say it to me here. The dispute between the two of them seemed to have attracted the fierce-looking man's attention. Looking at the man's gaze, Lewis clenched the sword hilt at his waist tightly. Diana also held her breath. Thankfully, the fierce-looking man only threw a glance at the two of them before continuing to eat the meat with his head lowered. Diana looked at her mother solemnly and said, "Mother, go out for a while. I'll come and look for you immediately." Diana seemed to have been stunned by Diana's solemn tone and walked out slowly. Diana then started to slowly inform the many waiters and customers to leave. Lewis continued to send her a message. "Diana, what are you doing? Leave first. Don't bother about them." However, Diana bit down on her lips stubbornly, not saying a word. However, just as everyone was quietly heading toward the door, the fierce-looking man slammed the table fiercely and said impatiently, "Damn it, to think that so many of them are leaving at once. Do you guys think that I'm a fool?" He pointed to Diana's mother, who had already taken half a step out of the door, and said calmly, "Scram back here." Diana's mother looked at this scene with some hesitation. Just then, a sharp cry rang out in the air, and the long sword in Lewis's hand slashed out toward the fierce-looking man's neck with a sharp sword light. This sword attack was not considered weak among the knights. This was especially so for the aura that was burning up from Lewis's body. It was as if he would be able to slash a mountain into two. However, faced with Lewis's full-powered sword attack, the fierce-looking man merely tossed out a piece of roasted meat, which smashed into Lewis's chest. With a loud bang, Lewis fell to the ground, feeling an intense pain in his chest. He could not catch his breath even after a long time. Seeing how even a level 19 knight like Lewis was defeated so easily, everyone present gasped. Diana's mother was so frightened that her legs turned weak and she fell to the ground. "All of you, stay there and don't move." The fierce-looking man ate the roasted meat in big mouthfuls while shouting, "Whoever moves, don't blame me for not holding back." Chapter 361. Lewis still wanted to stand up, but the moment he moved, he spewed out a mouthful of blood. Diana let out an astonished cry and held him up. "All right, Lewis. Stand there and don't move." Lewis looked at the fierce-looking man with a grim countenance and uttered a few words. "You have gone through the second transition." "Oh, I'm from the Serene Shrine, and I've gone through the second transition and reached level 20. If it wasn't because you dogs of the Empire had kept me locked up, I would have long since reached level 29. It wasn't easy for me to find a way out today. You guys better keep quiet. Don't think about escaping or reporting this." Hearing the words Serene Shrine, everyone present was slightly surprised. The Serene Shrine had spread throughout the entire Empire 25 years ago, with over 10 million followers. At that time, they were the greatest religious influence in the Empire, with the exception of the Holy See of Truth. Thereafter, the Serene Shrine took over the BI's region and tried to establish the Serene Divine Kingdom. However, they were wiped out by the Empire's troops. Thereafter, the Empire plunged into a state of bloodshed, and countless followers of the Serene Shrine lost their lives. To think that someone would be able to escape from prison today. Hearing the news about the second transition and the Serene Shrine, everyone present wore expressions of despair and fear. Firstly, a second transition expert was not someone they could go up against. Secondly, the Serene Shrine was rumored to be extremely brutal. When the fierce-looking man revealed his background, his killing intent was too obvious. Just as everyone was feeling hopeless, horrified, and terrified, Feng Xingjian finally finished his grilled meat and stood up. Seeing him stand up, Diana panicked and shouted, "What are you doing? Quickly sit back down." Feng Xingjian smiled. "Take this as money for the meal." With that, he walked toward the fierce-looking man. The fierce-looking man's eyes narrowed. When he saw Feng Xingjian walking over, he finally stopped eating. However, when he saw Feng Xingjian's young face, he eventually smiled. How powerful could such a young lad be? Thinking of this, he grabbed a cup and threw it toward Feng Xingjian. Everyone stared at this scene with their eyes wide open. Diana was infuriated by Fang Xingjian's actions. When she saw the ferocious man's actions, she opened her mouth and was about to cry out. She had seen with her own eyes how Lewis had been severely injured by this move. However, just as she opened her mouth halfway, her expression became sluggish and her mouth stopped moving, as if she had seen something unbelievable. Fang Xingjian raised his right hand and casually caught the metal cup. Under the powerful impact and reaction force, the cup was crushed into a ball and thrown to the ground. The fierce-looking man's expression changed. He stood up with a push of his legs and was about to attack again. However, Fang Xingjian had already arrived in front of him and kicked him in the face. His 158 strength allowed him to create a small earthquake with a casual kick. After he started cultivating the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces at level 23, every inch of his skin and every piece of his bones had become as hard as titanium alloy. With the conversion of his sword bones, the extremely violent and seething power was turned into a sword, gushing out from the sole of his foot. With an agonizing cry, the fierce-looking man fell to the ground, his face covered in blood. However, Fang Xingjian did not let up. He followed up and stomped down again. Under the blatant violence, his foot and calf were like sharp swords piercing through butter. With a single stomp, the fierce-looking man's sternum and lungs were all crushed. The man trembled slightly and looked at Fang Xingjian with a savage expression. In the end, his expression turned into endless unwillingness, and he completely lost his life. Fang Xingjian lifted his foot slowly and shook it lightly, shaking off every single drop of blood. Fang Xingjian walked out of the door. Lewis lifted his head with great difficulty, and a series of information suddenly flashed in his mind. Young Master Fang looks to be 17 or 18 years old, and he can even defeat a level 22nd transition expert. Lewis suddenly looked at Fang Xingjian's back with a fervent expression and shouted, "May I ask if you're Lord Fang Xingjian?" Fang Xingjian did not reply. With a flash, he disappeared completely. Not long after, more conferred knights arrived, carrying away the fierce-looking man's corpse and looking for Lewis, Diana, and the others for questioning. After walking out from the city guard's institution, Diana was still feeling a little dizzy. She threw a glance at her mother. Ever since she had seen the bloody corpse in the day, she had not spoken a single word. Diana patted her mother on the shoulder, feeling a little worried, and asked, "Mother, are you all right? What's the matter? What's the matter with me?" Diana's mother seemed to have woken up again. She looked at Diana passionately and said, "Fang Xingjian. That's really Fang Xingjian. It's the Fang Xingjian who invented the rebirth sword technique, the one who came in first in this regional selection. I heard from the people from the City Guards Institution and Lewis that it's him, Fang Xingjian." Diana's mother's eyes seemed to light up. She turned to look at Diana and said, "He comes to the barbecue shop to visit you so often. I think he's interested in you. He just likes to eat. Bullsh *T. I heard that just the royalties for the rebirth sword technique alone earns him several 100,000 gold every year. What can't he eat? Why would he come to this lousy shop of yours every day to eat?" The more Diana's mother analyzed, the more she felt that it made sense. "He must like you a lot. Otherwise, why would he invite you to be his chef? Diana, let me tell you this. Fang Xingjian is really a good person. You mustn't throw a tantrum for no good reason." Diana smiled and said, "Didn't you tell me not to be scammed by ruffians this morning and not to only care about other people's money? That's several thousand or tens of thousands of gold. Fang Xingjian earns several 100,000 gold every year." After saying that, Diana's mother threw a fierce glare at Diana and said, "I'm telling you, I'll only acknowledge Fang Xingjian as my son-in-law. Tomorrow, head to the regional academy to look for him." "Mother, how can you be like this? What do you know? Don't be fooled by your good looks now. In a few years' time, you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow. Who will care about you then? Fang Xingjian is different. He's a conferred knight now, and he might even become a national knight next year. In a few years' time, he might even become a divine-level expert." Diana found this funny and said, "How is that possible? Why not? Let me tell you, Fang Xingjian is like a piece of juicy meat now, and countless coquettish asterisk cheese are eyeing him. You can't just wait here. Diana's mother said anxiously, "Go tomorrow. Remember, then wouldn't I also become one of those coquettish asterisk cheese? All you know how to do is take the blame for your mother. If you don't go, I'll go home and commit suicide by eating feces. Even if I die, I'll make sure you die from the stench." Diana patted her head and said, "I still have to go to the barbecue shop tomorrow. Everything has been knocked over. You don't have to go. I'll help you tidy things up. What about Louis? He's so seriously injured. I want to go visit him tomorrow. I'll go visit him on your behalf." Chapter 362. In the Killing Techniques Palace, countless thunderbolts struck Fang Xingjian's body time and time again, ceaselessly strengthening the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces between each of the particles in his body. They continued to increase the toughness of Fang Xingjian's body. The number of thunderbolts continued to increase, turning into many lightning dragons that circled around Fang Xingjian. However, the attacks were all absorbed by him, using them to strengthen his body. After a short while, the two level 21 conferred knights could no longer hold on. They stopped performing the Thunderbolt sword technique and retreated, holding onto their swords as they panted heavily. Duoluan, who was the only one left, continued to perform the Thunderbolt sword technique. Although his face was flushed red, he continued to perform the Thunderbolt sword technique. His sword moved like dragons and snakes, bringing about lightning as he slashed out toward Fang Xingjian's body. After another hour or so, Duoluan also reached his limits and retreated lightly. He looked at Fang Xingjian, who was floating in the middle of the palace like a ball of lightning. The piercing light was like 10,000 suns rising into the sky. Then, accompanied by a long howl from Fang Xingjian, all the light was extinguished. The last of the thunderbolts were absorbed into Fang Xingjian's body. He exhaled slightly, and one or two balls of electricity would occasionally appear from his mouth and nostrils. Clenching his fists, Fang Xingjian smiled at Duoluan and said, "Are you interested in testing out the toughness of my body? The strength of the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces that you've cultivated is astonishing. I've been curious for a long time now." Duoluan laughed out loud and pierced out with the long sword in his hand. He increased his speed along with the electricity, leaving behind a long charred mark on the ground. His long sword pierced out toward Fang Xingjian's chest with a force of several tens of tons. Fang Xingjian merely stood there, not moving, allowing Duoluan's sword to pierce into his naked upper body. As a level 22 conferred knight, each of Duoluan's sword attacks could overturn a tank. Moreover, his sword attacks were like continuous lightning strikes, incessantly lighting up a series of electric sparks on Fang Xingjian's body. After 10 breaths' time, Duoluan stopped retreating and looked at Fang Xingjian, who was completely unscathed, in astonishment. "Isn't your defense a little too strong? I've seen many seniors who have been training at level 23 for many years, but none of them have reached your level. Yes, my cultivation speed is faster." Fang Xingjian clenched his fists in satisfaction. He had the specialty sword bones, and each of his bones would increase along with his level. Right now, he was at level 23, and his sword bones were a level 23 superior divine weapon. With the cultivation of the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces, as well as the assistance from the second level of the mystical prince, Fang Xingjian's cultivation speed was extremely fast. This allowed his body's defense to be comparable to that of a superior divine weapon, far surpassing that of ordinary level 23 conferred knights. However, I'm almost at my limit. Thank you for this period of time. I won't be coming over to cultivate the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces anymore. There's no need to stand on ceremony. With a good target like you, Xingjian, our Thunderbolt sword technique has also improved a lot. Duoluan's words were filled with politeness. Clearly, he wanted to build a good relationship with Fang Xingjian and even invited Fang Xingjian to have a meal in the Killing Techniques Palace. However, Fang Xingjian politely rejected the invitation. When Feng Xingjian walked out of the Killing Techniques Palace, Robert was already by his side. Robert reported, "During this period of time, we've earned another 280,000 gold. We're close to the 300,000 gold you need for the next level." Feng Xingjian nodded. With each level of the Mystical Prince, he would need an additional 100,000 gold. Right now, if he wanted to cultivate to the third level of the Mystical Prince, he would need 300,000 gold. If he were to continue at this rate, he would need 500,000 gold, 800,000 gold, or even 1 million gold for each level. Even the regional academy would find it difficult. Ordinary aristocrats would not be able to afford the cultivation even if they were to go bankrupt. Even if Feng Xingjian had the royalties from the rebirth sword technique, he would still need about 5 years before he would be able to accumulate enough wealth to reach the 10th level of the Mystical Prince. This was especially so when it came to the last few levels of the Mystical Prince. There were some materials that could no longer be bought with money. Hearing Robert's report, Feng Xingjian nodded. "Then let's start gathering the materials. Take note that this must still be done in secret. If there are any problems, look for Anderson first. He'll help to resolve them." Robert then said, "Oh, right. The female chef from the rotisserie has come looking for us. Oh, I'll get her to specially cook meat for me. Give her some ferocious beast to try. If she's a good job, I can let her be more responsible. I can also let her learn from the chefs in the academy. From what I know, she's quite talented in culinary arts. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to make the 12 flavors of the Vulcan rotisserie." "Understand," Robert said, and then asked Feng Xingjian, "Aren't you going to meet her?" He clearly thought that Feng Xingjian had taken a fancy to Diana. However, Feng Xingjian shook his head. Suddenly, his body came to a halt. Robert, who was at the side, looked over in puzzlement. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "I have some matters to attend to. I'll be leaving first." At the next moment, his body flashed, leaving behind a long trail of white air as he flew in the direction of the sacred land, leaving behind the astonished Robert. The moment he entered the training room in the sacred land, Feng Xingjian sat cross-legged on the ground. The skin all over his body contorted intensely, seething. Of course, this was not Feng Xingjian's skin seething. It was the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor's changes. Ever since the Sand Country's assassins had charged over, Feng Xingjian had sensed that the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor seemed to have been agitated and had gone through a change. The martial will that came from Damarov would occasionally rebound, as if wanting to leave his body. However, Feng Xingjian's current cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds compared to when he had suppressed the armor for the first time. How could he possibly let it leave his body so easily? Feng Xingjian let out a cold snort, and the martial will in his mind turned into a seething information current, gushing into the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. It fiercely flushed away the agitated information and then suppressed it. However, each time it happens, it gets more and more serious. In order to completely suppress Damarov's remnant will, I'll need to be even more powerful. At the thought of this, Feng Xingjian's countenance turned vicious, and he started cultivating once again. In the next few days, he would either temper his attributes, cultivate his waves and mental cultivation method, and continuously improve his 3 sets of sword techniques. Alternatively, he would head to the sword tower to understand the latest sword arts theories and research, or he would eat some delicacies, especially the Vulcan grilled meat that Diana had cooked using ferocious beasts. This had become Feng Xingjian's favorite food recently. Just like that, 2 days passed by, and Robert once again went to look for Feng Xingjian. "What's wrong? Have you gathered all the materials?" "It's a little troublesome." Robert threw a slightly guilty glance at Feng Xingjian. It was because Feng Xingjian kept running into trouble when it came to gathering the materials. "Speak." "The list of materials that you've given requires the Azure Dragon scale. However, the Azure Dragon has long gone extinct, and the Azure Dragon scale is extremely valuable. It's priceless in the great Western cities market." "Where do you have it?" "I heard that the Gao clan, a Westerner clan in the Bi's region, has an Azure Dragon scale." "Bi's region?" Feng Xingjian frowned. The Great Western region, which he was in, was located in the western region of the empire, while the Bei's region was located in the northwestern region of the empire. It was too far away from the great western city, and it would take him a day to make a round trip. There was no time for him to waste on the journey. Moreover, other than the day to make a round trip, he did not know how long it would take to discuss the price and the Azure Dragon scale. Therefore, he said, "Get Anderson to make the trip. He can make the decision on his own as long as it's within 150,000 gold. I've already told Lord Anderson, but he said that it's too far away." Fang Xingjian smiled. "Tell him what I said. If he's able to retrieve the Azure Dragon scale, the time he needs to run errands for me can be reduced by 1 month. He'll only need 5 months. Therefore, over the next few days, Fang Xingjian continued cultivating while waiting for the materials for the 3rd level of the Mystical Prince. With his 4 major specialties, the Sacred Land with 100 times the density, and the effects of the 2nd level of the Mystical Prince, his cultivation speed was very fast. Finally, in late October, his ether synchronization rate increased to 50%, and he became a level 24 conferred knight. Chapter 363. With his ether synchronization rate reaching 50%, the world in Fang Xingjian's heaven's perception instantly went through a tremendous change. The entire world seemed to be encompassed by all sorts of colors that could or could not be described with words. Every material substance was releasing either dazzling or dim light. This was because every material substance was continuously releasing heat and waves. And with a 50% ether synchronization rate, one could see the energy emitted by all things. Looking at the world transformed by his heaven's perception, Fang Xingjian could vaguely guess that this was radiation. However, such guesses were not of much help to his cultivation. He was not a scientist. Even if he had some knowledge, he still needed to cultivate step by step. The first thing he had to do was to slowly get used to this situation where the world was covered by countless colors. In such a situation, he basically could not see anything clearly, yet he could see countless colors. Moreover, these colors kept on changing and were 3-dimensional. This was even more confusing than being blind. However, Fang Xingjian's great talent helped him at this moment, allowing him to persevere. After getting used to it for 1 day and 1 night, he managed to grasp the state where his ether synchronization rate was at 50%. On the next day, he started to kill ferocious beasts to accumulate experience. With his current status in the academy, it was a piece of cake for him to purchase some ferocious beasts that could be used to level up. In a secret room, Fang Xingjian crossed his arms and stood there motionlessly. The Zenith Light Sword formation was activated, and the 6 light spots on his back turned into 6 light cannons, shooting out incessantly. Rat-shaped ferocious beasts within a range of 100 meters were incinerated into charcoal. These level 9 ocean rats did not have strong battle prowess and did not have much value as food. However, their greatest characteristic was that they had strong reproductive abilities. They could give birth to 2 litters every month, and each litter could give birth to 10 to 20 cubs. They would then mature completely within 10 days and start to go into heat 20 days later. After such reproduction-type ferocious beasts were discovered, they were naturally used by the people in Miracle World to gain experience and level up. However, those who could do this would naturally need to be very rich. It was more worthwhile for ordinary knights to go hunting in the mountains. Finally, the Zenith Light Sword formation behind Fang Xingjian paused for a moment and dissipated into the air. Fang Xingjian's level had finally risen to level 24. Coupled with his continuous cultivation during this period of time, his attributes had increased greatly once again, and his prodigious astral divine powers waves had also leveled up once again. As his long-range killing technique, the Zenith Light Sword formation had been integrated with many other sword techniques, allowing its range to reach 10 kilometers. Of course, compared to his speed of several kilometers per second, this distance could only be covered in 1 or 2 seconds. Fang Xingjian's goal was to continuously incorporate suitable sword techniques and increase the Zenith Light Sword formation's attacking range to over 100 kilometers. The close combat killing technique, the prodigious demolition sword, had also been continuously upgraded by Fang Xingjian. The prodigious demolition sword was almost indestructible. Therefore, Fang Xingjian had to think of ways to increase his speed. He kept on synthesizing various speed-type sword techniques, allowing his sword attack speed to become increasingly faster. On the other hand, Fang Xingjian's ether sword ripples continued to synthesize various high temperatures and low temperature sword techniques. This allowed the range of his changes to increase in frequency. Currently, he could already reach a high temperature of 5,000 degrees Celsius and an extremely low temperature of negative 180 degrees Celsius. Coupled with the fact that he had been continuously tempering his attributes, Fang Xingjian's current interface had become name, Fang Xingjian age, 17 occupation, heavenly sword sovereign level, 24 strength, 170 plus 12 agility, 247 plus 12 reaction, 145 endurance, 122 flexibility, 121 ether synchronization rate. 50% the attributes above come into effect once the prodigious astral divine powers waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 12 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance and agility attribute, techniques, boundaries negation, level 40 rebirth sword technique, level 40 new 9-headed dragon sword technique, level 40 zenith light sword formation, ether sword ripples, level 40 prodigious demolition sword, level 4 ether divine art, heaven's volition sword intense specialties, genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist heightened, reflexes, perfect muscles, single sword world subjugation, elementary berserkness, unparalleled sword intent, apex sword bones, swordless path, darkness sword sense, heavenly sword imprint waves, level 5 prodigious astral divine powers waves mental cultivation method, level 6 universal sword dominance lunisolar with another qualitative leap in his abilities. Fang Xingjian immediately activated his martial will and counterattacked the heavenly abyss annihilation armor he was wearing. When he was at level 20, he was already able to suppress the heavenly abyss annihilation armor's instincts. Now that he was at level 24, his abilities were even stronger, his synchronization rate had reached 50%, and his martial will was growing at a rapid rate. This attack shattered the heavenly abyss annihilation armor's instincts. Layers of scales emerged from the surface of his body, and layers of supporting force fields flashed incessantly. Over the past month, Fang Xingjian had scanned through all the killing sword techniques in the library, and the sword theories in his mind had reached a new peak. Right now, he was undergoing a willpower impact, and his martial will brought along endless sword theories, turning into streams of sword intents and gushing into the depths of the heavenly abyss annihilation armor. Sword intents were formed from information currents that focused on sword theories. Streams of sword intents pierced through the heavenly abyss annihilation armor, continuously destroying Damarov's remnant consciousness. However, the remnant consciousness of a level 29 expert was not so easy to deal with. As more and more consciousness was awakened, the heavenly abyss annihilation armor on Fang Xingjian trembled once again. Fang Xingjian felt as if there were countless sharp spikes piercing into his body from the heavenly abyss annihilation armor. At the next moment, violent ether particles' energy gushed into his body through these sharp spikes, wildly increasing his powers. As he continued to penetrate deeper into the heavenly abyss annihilation armor, suppressing more of Damarov's remnant consciousness, Fang Xingjian was also able to unleash more of the heavenly abyss annihilation armor's marvelous effects. The heavenly abyss annihilation armor originally had 50% of Damarov's powers. Now, Fang Xingjian could only unleash 10% of his powers, but now he could only unleash 20% of his powers. The duration was also extended to a total of 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, Fang Xingjian let out a furious bellow and retracted the scales all over his body. The light from the supporting force fields dissipated one by one. His countenance was pale, and sweat was dripping down from his forehead. Although he had great talent and had a lot of help, it was still very taxing for him to suppress Damarov's remnant consciousness at level 24. After resting for about half an hour, Fang Xingjian walked out from the secret chamber and saw an anxious Ferdinand. Ever since he had handed over the matter of authorizing the sword techniques to Ferdinand, he had been focusing on this. Although his improvement in his martial arts was not great, the wealth he controlled every day surpassed that of most of the aristocrats in the great western city. This caused his influence to grow increasingly stronger. "What's wrong, Ferdinand? What happened?" Ferdinand said with a grim countenance. "There's a problem with the Gao clan in the Bi's continent." Fang Xingjian nodded. "The Bi's continent's Gao clan? I remember that Anderson was sent over." Ferdinand nodded with a grim countenance. "I just received news that Anderson is seriously injured and unconscious." Chapter 364. Hearing the news that Anderson was in a coma, Fang Xingjian frowned and asked, "What happened? Who did this?" Ferdinand said, "Gao clan's second young master. It said that the two of them had a conflict at a banquet. Anderson was surrounded and knocked out. They've apologized, but the Azure Dragon scale has never been mentioned again." Fang Xingjian shook his head and sighed. "Where's Zhou Xingwen?" "Old Zhou is still in the north. He's just gone to the northern ice region." "Who's the strongest person in Gao clan?" Ferdinand said, "Gao clan's clan head, Gao Zishuan. He's usually in seclusion, but there's news that he's already a second transition level 27 expert. Although he's not a conferred knight of the Empire, he's the leader of the fiery martial style. He's proficient in the fiery martial style's burning mountains and boiling seas killing technique." Fang Xingjian fell silent for a moment, then sighed and said, "Forget it. I'll go personally." Ferdinand was shocked and said, "Xingjian, you're going personally? Isn't it a little dangerous? Right now, the Sand Country's assassins and the First Prince's subordinates are all keeping an eye on you. It's too dangerous for you to leave the great western city." Fang Xingjian shook his head and said, "The Sand Country's assassins are nothing to worry about. They won't send a true expert to the Empire to take the risk. As for the First Prince, before he attains the divine level, he'll still have his reservations about the Holy Orison and won't make a move easily. Moreover, the other party knows of my background and still dares to make a move against Anderson. They must have something up their sleeves. It'll probably be hard for old Zhou to deal with them. Then what about Gao Zishuan? If he's at level 27, level 27 isn't a threat to me." Fang Xingjian often trained with head of department James, so he had a rough estimate of the abilities of high-level conferred knights. "If I want to leave, they won't be able to stop me. His sword arts, specialties, attributes, and the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, which could unleash more of its powers, as well as the Heaven's Volition Sword Intent, which was constantly circulating in the depths of his consciousness, were his greatest reliance. Give me a copy of the Gao clan's information. I'll set off tomorrow and try to return on the same day." With Fang Xingjian's speed, if he was fast enough, he might really be able to return on the same day. Even so, he had wasted a day's time. His time was very precious now, and a day's time was sufficient for him to cultivate a few sword techniques to the maximum level. Thereafter, Fang Xingjian returned to the training room in the Sacred Land and started to comprehend the wonders of being a level 24 conferred knight and having a synchronization rate of 50%. With his heaven's perception, Fang Xingjian could clearly sense the energy of all living things. He could also sense the flow of energy in the air. As a result, with every thrust of his sword, apart from the consideration of his physical strength, air, gravity, and waves, he also had a grasp of the energy of all living things. Everything in the world emits energy all the time, such as heat and light. At level 24, with a synchronization rate of over 50%, I can sense the energy of all living things. At this level, conferred knights will be able to borrow the energy of all living things in the world with each of their killing techniques, increasing the lethality and range of their moves. As Fang Xingjian thrust it out with his sword, there was an additional layer of blurry light on the tip of his sword. This was the demolition sword light condensed after performing the prodigious demolition sword. Feng Xingjian's long sword danced about, and wherever the demolition sword light passed by, a layer of the ground would be annihilated. All the air disappeared in an instant. As the long sword swung out, there was no sound of air currents at all. It was because the moment it came into contact with the demolition sword light, it would be annihilated. It was a true annihilation of all living things. Even sound would not be able to transmit out. After stepping into level 24, Feng Xingjian could sense that the speed and efficiency of his demolition sword light condensation had increased by more than twofold. He could sense that when he thrust out his sword, the omnipresent energy in the air was strengthened into his sword. Annihilating a few tons of physical substances was already his limit. However, right now, he could annihilate over 10 tons of physical substances before the demolition sword light would dissipate. The corners of Feng Xingjian's lips curled up into a smile. With a flash, he appeared 100 meters up in the sky. The zenith light sword formation was activated, and 6 light spots appeared behind him. However, at the next moment, countless amounts of energy in the air were added into it, and the light spots grew from the size of a fist to the size of a head. Feng Xingjian's eyes narrowed slightly. With his heaven's perception, he saw a mountain peak over 10 kilometers away. The zenith light sword formation shot out explosively, and a light sword cut across the sky like a laser cannon, striking a huge boulder 15 kilometers away. In an instant, a large part of the boulder was melted. Feng Xingjian could sense that the light sword shot out by the zenith light sword formation was absorbing the light and heat from the sky, continuously increasing its prowess. He shot it out a few more times and discovered that not only had the prowess of the zenith light sword formation increased, but its range had also increased to 20 kilometers. All right, Feng Xingjian then tried out the ether sword ripples. With a single thought, 10 streams of sword ripples swept out, cutting through the air and burning up the atmosphere. They then shot out in all directions like fiery meteors. During this period of cultivation, his agility attribute had reached 259 points. In addition to the increment of his specialties, his maximum speed had already broken through 16 times that of supersonic speed, even though the increase in his speed had become increasingly slower due to the air resistance. With the explosion of the ether sword ripples, the friction in the air was like that of meteors exploding. Sparks flew in all directions, giving off a charred smell. What was even more terrifying was that this time around, not only did the ether sword ripples sweep out beyond the 10-meter radius of his heaven's perception, but they also gradually dissipated after reaching a distance of 30 meters. As expected, after his synchronization rate broke through 50% and he stepped into level 24, both the prowess and the range of his sword techniques had increased tremendously. A level 23 knight could use the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces to increase his body's toughness, while a level 24 knight could borrow the energy of all living things in the world to increase the prowess of his killing techniques. But is the effect of the increase in my agility attribute getting weaker and weaker due to the atmospheric resistance? It's better for me to increase my other attributes first. Feng Xingjian sensed the speed of the ether sword ripples, as well as the changes in his sword arts cultivation. Just as he performed his sword techniques once again, Feng Xingjian felt a strange feeling. On his stats window, the unparalleled sword intent apex seemed to be stirring as well. In the sky, Feng Xingjian stepped on the air and shot out explosively. The long sword in his hand, which was condensed from water vapor, was swung out, bringing along a large stretch of sword light that encompassed the sky. Feng Xingjian started performing sets of sword techniques one after another. The unparalleled sword intent apex had originally allowed him to see through the weaknesses of all living things, allowing him to pick up any sword techniques extremely quickly. However, as his cultivation gradually increased, he would eventually be able to slash and slice through everything. All this while, Feng Xingjian could only rely on himself to slash through the Empire's divine weapons with his bare hands, and he did not know how he could improve further. However, now that he had consecutively leveled up, and through the increase in his ether synchronization rate, he was able to sense the waves, heavenly thunders, and terrestrial magnetism forces, as well as the energy of all living things in the world. The realm of the unparalleled sword intent. Apex had finally increased once again. After a long while, his movements gradually came to a stop, and there seemed to be an extremely sharp aura circulating all over his body. Looking at his palm, he suddenly used his finger to cut across it lightly. Without exerting any strength or power, kacha-kacha sounds rang out. Just by relying on his pure sword arts realm, he managed to leave behind a white mark on the surface of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. After a few breaths, the power of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor circulated, erasing the white mark. Fang Xingjian knew that the unparalleled sword intent. Apex would continue to increase as his ether synchronization rate increased. Right now, he could easily slash through inferior divine weapons with his bare hands. If he were to go all out, he would probably be able to slash through superior divine weapons as well. His abilities had increased tremendously once again. To begin with, Fang Xingjian had been able to rely on his battle prowess, which far surpassed that of ordinary conferred knights to fight against level 25 or even level 26 conferred knights. Now that he had stepped into level 24, through the strengthening of the energies of all living things, not only had the range and prowess of his sword techniques increased tremendously, but his sword arts cultivation had also improved along with the progress of the unparalleled sword intent Apex. Coupled with the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, Terra Ingurgitation, and the Heaven's Volition Sword Intent, he was even more confident that he could defeat a level 27 conferred knight head-on. Chapter 365. Level 25 conferred knights could sense cells, modify their bodies, condense specialty seeds, and gradually step into the realm of God. Level 26 conferred knights were a step further in their cultivation of heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces. Their killing techniques could be directed at physical particles, destroying the structural forces between the opponent's physical particles and carrying out intrinsic physical destruction. Level 27 conferred knights were a step further in their ability to sense the changes in physical particles. It was like a small world, and they could refine the powers of this small world to unleash world-shaking prowess, greatly increasing the prowess of their killing techniques. However, Fang Xingjian had Terra Ingurgitation, Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, and the Heaven's Volition Sword Intent. With his current cultivation, he even had the confidence to defeat level 27 conferred knights. However, his biggest flaw now was that these powers all had a huge limit. The outburst of the Heaven's Volition Sword Intent could allow him to go up against level 28 or even level 29 experts. However, it would require him to deplete 100,000 potential points per second. As Fang Xingjian wanted to temper his attributes, it was impossible for him to save up too much. He could only perform it for 1 to 2 seconds at most. Terra Ingurgitation could only be performed once per hour. Level 5 Terra Ingurgitation could absorb the gravitational forces within a range of 5 kilometers, and with a single sword attack, it could destroy the world. It was enough to suppress most level 27 experts. The Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor could unleash 20% of Damarov's powers, which was enough to suppress level 26 experts. When these powers could not be performed, Fang Xingjian could rely on his own attributes, specialties, and killing techniques to go up against level 26 conferred knights at level 24. Fang Xingjian now had a clear understanding of his battle prowess. This was why he had the confidence to make a trip to Gao Clan personally. After getting used to the powers he now had at level 24, Fang Xingjian returned to the Sacred Land and started to read through Gao Clan's information. Gao Clan was the leader of the fiery martial style, a top-notch faction in Bi's region. The clan and faction's influence were deeply rooted in Bi's region. Not only did they control a large number of shops, mines, and medicinal herb businesses, they had also set up many academies and had been nurturing their successors. However, In this generation of Gao clan, the eldest young master and the second young master each led a faction. The eldest young master still wanted the fiery martial style to be independent from the empire, passing down their martial techniques and clan. The second young master, on the other hand, wanted to get closer to the empire and became a conferred knight in Bi's region, wanting to lead the clan into the empire. Their different ideologies, coupled with the competition for the position of the family head, caused their conflicts to erupt frequently. The next day, just as dawn broke, Fang Xingjian sprinted up to a height of over 1,000 meters. Following that, the air currents beneath his feet exploded and he shot into the clouds like a rocket, leaving a long trail of white smoke behind him. The strong gales chased after Fang Xingjian, tearing apart layers of white clouds and creating a large hole in the thick layer of clouds. Arriving at an altitude of 10,000 meters, Fang Xingjian looked down at the endless sea of clouds beneath his feet and smiled faintly. Then, he took large strides forward. Every step he took caused a violent surge of energy and the atmosphere to explode, constantly pushing his body forward at high speed. The shock waves formed by his body breaking through the air quickly caused the clouds to churn, accompanied by explosive sounds like thunder and lightning. After traveling for a period of time, Fang Xingjian arrived in the sky above Bi's continent's Pearl City. Fang Xingjian's body came to a halt. Having lost the reaction force provided by the exploding air under his feet, he plunged toward the ground like a cannonball. As he descended, Fang Xingjian would occasionally strike the air, changing the direction of his body's descent. He was heading toward the address in the documents. He was going to land in the Gao clan's courtyard. Simultaneously, in the hall of the Gao clan, an extremely intense meeting was going on. The Gao clan's eldest young master, Gao Anha, sat in the main seat, looking in the direction below him with a slightly gloomy expression. His younger half-brother, the Gao clan's second young master, Gao Ankong, was standing there with his head raised and chest puffed out, looking straight at him without showing any signs of weakness. Gao on his side and said, "Second brother, you clearly know that Anderson was sent by Fang Xingjian. Why did you still injure him?" Fang Xingjian's talent is extremely high, and he has become famous throughout the world because of the rebirth sword technique. He has the Great Western region and the Second Prince backing him, and his influence is overwhelming. Are you trying to bring trouble to the Gao clan? The second young master, Gao Ankong, let out a cold laugh and said, "Elder brother, you're wrong. Do you think that the Gao clan will be fine just because we're polite to everyone? Our eyes are black and our skin is yellow. In this world, we're still foreigners. If we're slightly stronger, we'll only make those white pigs fearful and not dare to make a move recklessly." However, as the Gao clan's influence and wealth continue to expand, there'll come a day where they'll kill and bleed. "So, you've joined someone else?" Gao Anha said furiously. "Have you forgotten the clan's teachings? Our Gao clan and the fiery martial style will forever remain neutral and will not get involved in the empire's struggles. No one can remain neutral forever." Gao Ankong let out a cold snort and said, not showing any signs of weakness, "It's the same for the Gao clan and the fiery martial style. If they wish to continue passing down their legacy, they'll have to join the strongest. In the current world, the first prince has great ambitions and is the strongest in the royal family. It won't be long before he attains the divine level and unifies the empire. This is especially so for His Highness, who is extremely magnanimous and can accommodate us Westerners. It's a good thing for us to join the Great Hall. In the future, when His Highness ascends to the throne, we'll have contributed greatly to his ascension. What can these small shops and businesses amount to?" "Shut up." The eldest young master, Gao Anha, stood up furiously. "In the fight for the throne, the slightest carelessness will result in death and the destruction of the entire clan. How dare you gamble the entire Gao clan? If you don't even have this bit of boldness, how are you going to lead the Gao clan to prosperity?" The second young master, Gao Ankong, said in disdain, "Right now, in the empire, the second prince is extremely weak. His cultivation is the weakest among the 5 princes. The third prince is unfathomable, but his schemes are mysterious. He also has the legacy of the ancient path of hell and doesn't have what it takes to be a ruler. Although the fourth prince has a noble disposition and is backed by the church, as long as he's a believer in the universal truth, the emperor will definitely not pass the throne to him. It's true that the fifth prince is extremely talented and has astonishing abilities. Other than the first prince, he could be said to be the person who has the highest chance of attaining the divine level. However, he's a martial arts fanatic and is nothing to be worried about. Only the first prince is extremely talented. In the future, not only will he be able to ascend to the throne, but he will also have the ambition to revive the empire, invade the Sand Country in the east, attack the church in the north, and wipe out the Mage King in the west. He will truly be the reincarnation of an immortal, a deity who has descended to the mortal world. The eldest young master, Gao Anha, smiled coldly and said, "Therefore, you joined forces with others to injure that Anderson? Anderson and Fang Xingjian are merely insignificant people. When the first prince comes out of seclusion in the future, they'll either be killed or surrendered. They're not worth conspiring with," the second young master, Gao Ankong, said confidently. Moreover, the Azure Dragon Scale is something that the first prince specifically wants. The will of the Azure Dragon in it can speed up the first prince's attempt to attain the divine level. Once I offer it to him, I'll have done a great service and will be able to ensure the Gao clan's peace for 100 years. That Anderson is stubborn, so of course, I can only make a small move and punish him. Good. You're really my good second brother. It seems that you're determined to side with the first prince. With that, the eldest young master clapped his hands, and the 3-second transition experts of the fiery martial style, heavenly fire, earthly fire, and mortal fire, walked out slowly. These 3 elders had been cultivating in the fiery martial style for many years and were all level 25 experts. They had started to condense specialty seeds. Since that's the case, you must be prepared to fall out with me. If you have any trump cards, just show them all. As the eldest young master spoke, a total of 120 streams of mysterious aura rose from inside and outside his body. It was clear that he had also stepped into level 25 and condensed 120 specialty seeds. Seeing the actions of the 4 of them, Gao Ankong laughed out loud and said, "Brother, you really understand me well. I won't do something that I'm not confident in. Mr. Shun, I'll have to trouble you to make a move." Chapter 366. Just as Gao Ankong finished his words, an old man dressed in long gray robes, who looked like an ascetic monk, slowly walked into the hall. Eldest young master Gao Anha said, "Second brother, you're colluding with outsiders? Elders, please take down this old man. Otherwise, everyone will think that our Gao clan is a place where they can enter and leave as they please." Hearing that, elders Tianhua, earthly Hua, and mortal Hua nodded, and layers of flames gradually appeared on their bodies. Elder Tianhua, who was the leader, had red hair and beard. He let out a low bellow. "Old man, are you going to surrender yourself, or do the 3 of us have to beat you up until you beg for mercy?" Mr. Shun's expression turned bitter as he shook his head and sighed. Bitter. Humans are stupid, and all living things are bitter. His strange behavior caused the 3 elders to be puzzled. However, second young master Gao Ankong appeared calm, as if he was very confident in Mr. Shun. Elder Tianhua narrowed his eyes, which were burning with flames. "The 2 of you, hold the fort for me. I'll go up and meet him." With that, Elder Tianhua waved his hand, condensing the heat of the sun to summon over 100 fire dragons, which charged toward Mr. Shun. Each fire dragon was powerful enough to burn a person into charcoal. Over 100 fire dragons pounced forth, raising the temperature of the entire hall crazily. It was as if they had entered a big steamer. Mr. Shun's expression turned increasingly bitter, but his entire body shone with golden light as he walked toward the fire dragons. Courting death. Seeing that Mr. Shun was walking toward them, Elder Tianhua let out a cold snort and activated his killing technique. The 100 fire dragons turned into a scorching white color, and the temperature rose rapidly once again. Even without direct contact, the entire hall was heated up to several hundred degrees. Countless furniture and accessories ignited without any fire, as if the entire room was about to be engulfed in a sea of flames. The eldest young master and second young master frowned and retreated. Even though they were experts of the fiery martial style, they were not willing to endure such a temperature for nothing. As for Mr. Shun, who was standing in front of the fire dragon, apart from the increasingly bitter expression on his face, he was completely unharmed. His pale golden body threw a punch at the fire dragon. Bang, 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 bang. Consecutive banging sounds rang out as Mr. Shin punched out one punch after another, causing all the fire dragons to explode. His gray robes were burned into ashes, revealing his skinny and weak body. Although his body was skinny and weak, it was encompassed by a faint golden layer, giving off an extremely sacred feeling. At the sight of this, Elder Tianhua's expression turned increasingly grim. As information currents gushed forth, he summoned his two junior brothers to attack together. The three of them surrounded the golden Mr. Shun, and white flames surged out, turning into a fireball that enveloped Mr. Shun completely. When this killing technique was used, the temperature in the hall plunged rapidly. All the heat was concentrated in the center of the fireball, displaying the three elders' exquisite control over their killing techniques. With this fire god shield, even if it's a superior divine weapon, given enough time, it would be able to melt. I don't believe that this old fogey will be able to withstand it. Just as the three elders thought, the fire and the sea, Shun, had A. In the firelight, Mr. Shun, who had light golden skin, stood proudly. The three elders vomited blood and retreated. Just then, the eldest young master let out a long howl, and all the flames were like swallows returning to their nest. They were all attracted to his hands, extinguishing the great fire. At the same time, eldest young master Gao Anha clenched his fist slightly, and the white flames that he had condensed turned into a flaming longsword that kept burning. He became one with the sword and turned into a shocking rainbow that slashed toward Mr. Shun. The fiery martial-style killing technique, fire-bathing divine sword, was propelled by the eldest young master's 62% ether synchronization rate. With a slash, the high temperature of over 10,000 degrees Celsius destroyed the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces in physical bodies, destroying the structure of all physical substances. At this moment, when Gao Anha saw the power Mr. Shun had displayed, he no longer dared to hold back. He unleashed his peak level 26 powers. However, faced with Gao Anha's world-shaking sword attack, Mr. Shun only shook his head slightly. He tapped out a finger, bringing along a myriad of golden light, and clashed against Gao Anha's fire-bathing divine sword. An explosive crackle rang out, and an expression of disbelief flashed on Gao Anha's face. Violent power gushed out from Mr. Shun's fingertip, and endless power burst out from the physical particles in Mr. Shun's body. In Gao Anha's eyes, it was as if he could see countless worlds exploding and being destroyed in Mr. Shun's body. The violent power was unleashed on Gao Anha's body through the most primitive and backward means. However, due to the absolute advantage in terms of quantity, Gao Anha's body, which had been tempered for a long time, was beaten up to the point where blood splattered everywhere as he fell to the ground. Gao Anha spewed out a large mouthful of fresh blood. As he regenerated his body, he stared at Mr. Shun and said, "That power from earlier was the explosive power from the small world in your body. You're second transition level 27 expert. That's tough." Mr. Shun shook his head and smiled bitterly. The first prince is destined by the heavens. He's the future ruler of the world. Helping him is benefiting the people of the world. Young brother, why do you persist in going about things the wrong way? Seizing by force, using violence to threaten and control your subordinates. Can this be considered destined by the heavens? Second young master Gao Onkong laughed out loud and said, "The winner takes all. The winner takes all." Elder brother, you don't even understand such a simple logic? The eldest young master spewed out another mouthful of fresh blood. He had been dealt a serious blow by Mr. Shen earlier, and his injuries were too severe. Even if he were to use all his might to regenerate his body, he would not be able to recover. He stared at the second young master and said, "Second brother, in the fight for the throne, the slightest carelessness will result in the death of your entire clan. You're bringing the entire clan into chaos." Haha, elder brother, are you jealous? You're jealous that I've received the first prince's favor. You're jealous that I'm about to replace you as the Gao clan's clan head. Second young master Gao Onkong laughed out loud and said, "It's a pity that it's useless to be jealous. Before absolute power, your thoughts are not important." Father won't agree to it. Eldest young master Gao Onha said, "Are you prepared to face father's wrath? What he hates the most are people who go against the clan's rules." Hearing the word father, second young master Gao Onkong fell silent for a moment, as if he was instinctively afraid. After a while, he let out a breath, smiled, and looked at Mr. Shun, saying, "Mr. Shun is a valiant general under the first prince, a level 27 super expert. He has also cultivated the ancient path of Hell's ultimate technique, the indestructible golden body. The toughness of his body is comparable to a level 27 superior divine weapon. Although Father is also a level 27 expert, he won't be able to do anything to Mr. Shun. Even a valiant general under the first prince is unable to do anything to him. Tell me, what right does Father have to go against the first prince's will? B****, are you still going to attack Father?" The second young master laughed out loud. "That'll depend on whether Father will be obedient or not." He then cupped his hands toward Mr. Shun and said politely, "Mr. Shun, please capture the few of them. This will save us from any accidents when we're talking to Father later on." Bitterness, bitterness. The golden light on Mr. Shun's body grew even brighter. If the first prince isn't able to rule over the world, then all lives will suffer. Just then, a loud bang rang out and the ground trembled a little. It was as if something had landed on the ground. Following that, two more booms rang out and some houses collapsed. Everyone turned their gazes over and saw that the ruins of the collapsed houses had been blasted away. Fang Xingzhan walked over leisurely. Second young master Gao Onkong frowned and asked, "Who are you?" Chapter 367. Second young master Gao Onkong frowned and asked, "Who are you?" Fang Xingzhan scanned the situation at the scene. Combining it with what he had seen during the earlier descent, he had a rough idea of who this was. Great Western Region, Fang Xingzhan. He threw a glance at the second young master and Mr. Shun, then turned to look at the eldest young master, Gao Onha, and said, "Gao Onha, right? I'll help you kill this old thing, and you'll give me the Azure Dragon scale. How about that?" He pointed at Mr. Shun. Hearing that, second young master Gao Onkong laughed out loud, looking at Fang Xingzhan as if he was looking at a fool. Mr. Shun's countenance turned bitter as he said, "Bitter, bitter. You're Fang Xingzhan? You're really a dragon amongst men, but why must you go against the heavens and make an enemy out of the first prince? Aren't you overestimating yourself and thinking too highly of yourself? The way you speak is really infuriating. Moreover, it's already infuriating enough that I've wasted an entire day coming here." Fang Xingzhan glared at Mr. Shun and said, "Forget it. I'll kill you first before we talk about the Azure Dragon scale." Mr. Shin wore a helpless expression. "Young brother Xingzhan, the first prince is kind and generous. Although he said that he'll let you off for a year, it doesn't mean that I won't retaliate. If you really interfere in the Gao clan's matters, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Do you think that I only know how to take a beating and not retaliate? Sigh, the people of the world are foolish and ignorant. It's really hard on me." The eldest young master said anxiously, "Fang Xingzhan, he's a level 27 expert, and can already refine the power of the small world in his body. You mustn't fight him head-on. Fang Xingjian opened up his hand, and water vapor condensed into a long sword. Simultaneously, layers of scales appeared on the surface of his body. At the next moment, an extremely powerful force burst forth from Fang Xingjian's body. Within a range of 5 kilometers, everyone felt their bodies become lighter. It was as if the world had been turned upside down and everything floated up. At the same time, an extremely violent stream of information broke into everyone's sea of consciousness. Old ghost, your strength isn't bad. I'll just kill you with a single move. The astonishing aura of the Terra ingurgitation burst forth from Fang Xingjian's body, and at the same time, the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor was activated. Endless power gushed out from Fang Xingjian's body, and all sorts of powers of magnetism and light rays were absorbed into Fang Xingjian's body. Right now, Fang Xingjian's waves had already reached level 5. Under the push of the level 5 prodigious astral divine powers waves, the area that the Terra ingurgitation encompassed was 5 kilometers. What did that mean? This meant that the gravitational force that this move brought about was at least 125 times that of the first-level Terra ingurgitation. This meant that the power of Fang Xingjian's current sword attack, just the Terra ingurgitation alone, was at least 125 times stronger than the sword attack he had unleashed in the regional selections arena. Moreover, he still had the support of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. As if sensing the danger that Fang Xingjian was in at this moment, Mr. Shun let out a furious bellow, and golden light shone from all over his body. Through his heaven's perception, he could sense that there were a myriad of particles all over his body being stirred up by him. Each particle contained an extremely stable power circulating, as if there were many small worlds in his body. However, under his agitation, they were suddenly unleashed explosively. The small worlds made up of a myriad of physical particles exploded, and the explosion of a total of 100,000 physical particles pushed his powers to the limits. Countless amounts of energy erupted, and golden light filled up his body, even coming out from his ears, nose, eyes, and mouth. The killing technique, Indestructible Golden Body, was activated at full power, increasing Mr. Shun's powers to a new extreme. At this moment, he even had the confidence to take on a level 29 expert's attack head-on and not die. To think that you're thinking of killing me with a single move. You're really overestimating yourself and don't know what you're talking about. Just as Mr. Shun was thinking of this, Fang Xingjian's sword attack came slashing down from below. The endless power that the Terra ingurgitation had absorbed was contained within it, and a violent force that could overturn an entire city came crashing over. Before it even got close, the shockwaves had already torn the ground under Mr. Shin's feet, layer by layer. Simultaneously, the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor also unleashed its powers explosively. 20% of Damarov's powers gushed out, turning into layers of supporting powers that shone brightly on the surface of Fang Xingjian's body, continuously strengthening the prowess of this sword attack. Even with the support of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, Fang Xingjian still felt as if a wild horse had broken free from its reins, absorbing the gravity within a range of 5 kilometers. Based on his calculations, the prowess of the gravity within a range of 5 kilometers would be equivalent to smashing down half of Mount Tai. However, by the looks of it, the prowess was even greater than what he had expected. As expected of the prodigious astral divine powers waves, the melancholic monarch's greatest legacy, a divine-level expert from 200 years ago. Its prowess was so great that it was no longer like that of humans. If it was not for the support of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, the inhalation and exhalation of various natural powers, and the help of the supporting force fields, Fang Xingjian would probably not be able to control this power at all. With this sword attack, it could destroy mountains and rivers and change the course of rivers. With this sword attack, it could slash a city into two. With this sword attack, it could kill several 100,000 or even several million people. This was the prowess of the melancholic monarch's greatest legacy, the prodigious astral divine powers waves. The prowess of this sword attack had far surpassed Feng Xingjian's own estimations. Even Feng Xingjian himself had not expected that the level 5 prodigious astral divine powers waves would be so powerful. With the long sword in the air, Mr. Shun's mind was completely blank. Even though he was already able to break physical particles and extract energy from small worlds, when faced with this sword attack that could destroy the world, his mind was still unable to muster up any power to resist. This was a divine power that could cause one to feel despair. Absolute power. Unless he could cultivate the power of even more physical particles, he would not be able to go up against it with just the power he had extracted from 100,000 particles. Based on the Empire's research, the human body was made up of 1.08 billion particles. However, it was extremely rare, even among level 29 experts, to be able to cultivate their small worlds to the point where 1.08 billion particles could explode at the same time. When most people's ether synchronization rate reached 90% and they advanced from level 27 to level 28, they would usually only be able to extract the power of a few million physical particles. Regardless of whether it was condensing specialty seeds or extracting the power of physical particles, it was a very long path. Even level 29 experts were still working hard on it. Mr. Shun let out a final furious bellow. Before his body could receive this sword attack, he had already been sent through the air by the power, turning into dust and disappearing completely. This sword attack seemed to be unstoppable as it continued to send its power toward the sky. Thankfully, although the level 5 terror ingurgitation was stronger than Feng Xingjian had expected, he knew that the prowess of this attack was not to be underestimated. Once it smashed on the ground, it would cause unimaginable damage. Therefore, from the very beginning, Feng Xingjian had moved from the bottom to the top. He raised his long sword and sent all of his power toward the sky. The rumbling sounds were deafening, almost ringing through the entire city. Violent air currents soared into the sky. There were no fancy special effects. It was just an upward slash of the sword using pure power. However, it pushed the air to form air shock waves that surpassed the speed of sound, breaking through the sea of clouds and creating a huge hole in the stratosphere. Countless people watched with their eyes and mouths agape as the sky was slowly split apart. Sunlight shone down, revealing the outer space. At this moment, the area within a range of several kilometers was illuminated by the piercing sunlight. Endless light encompassed the entire Pearl City. With this sword attack, it was as if the entire sky had been slashed apart. Eldest young Master Gao Anha lifted his head in a daze. There were no clouds or blue sky, only a stretch of pitch-black outer space exposed to everyone. Chapter 368. Second young Master Gao Ankong looked at the sky, which was pitch black yet filled with sunlight. He felt a strong sense of contradiction. However, his eyes were filled with endless terror. This sword attack, which had slashed open the sky, was too terrifying, and too powerful. This was the strongest sword attack he had ever seen in his life. The water sword in Feng Xingjian's hand had long since turned into dust, and he kept the heavenly abyss annihilation armor. Looking at the strange phenomenon in the sky, he smiled. Excellent. Terra ingurgitation is stronger than I imagined. If I can cultivate it to level 7 or even level 8, then even a divine level expert might not be able to receive this sword attack unscathed, right? He then lowered his head and looked at the dumbfounded Gao Anha. All right. The old man is dead. I'm not interested in your clan's matters. Hand over the Azure Dragon scale. Eldest young Master Gao Anha looked at Feng Xingjian in a daze. At the same time, he looked around. The repercussions of that sword attack had turned many of the Gao clan's buildings into ruins. Thankfully, everyone had floated up due to the disappearance of gravity and had not been killed. However, looking at Feng Xingjian's glare, he did not dare to show any hesitation. He stood up at the start, nodded, and said, all right. I'll get someone to bring the Azure Dragon scale over immediately. He called Elder Tianhua over. The latter was covered in dirt and blood, but he did not dare to be slow. He dashed toward the place where the azure dragon scale was placed. Just then, a long howl rang out, and an old man dashed up to everyone. When he saw Gao Anha, he asked in horror, "What's going on? Who was the one who attacked earlier? Which deity-level expert has come?" Gao Anha pointed at Fang Xingjian with a bitter expression and said, "Father, it was Lord Fang Xingjian who helped us eliminate our enemies." Fang Xingjian? Gao Clan's clan head, Gao Zishuan, had been in seclusion all year round, and this was the first time he had come out in recent years. It was because his ether synchronization rate had reached 89%, and he could clear the 9th heavenly barrier at any moment. This was why he had been in seclusion all this time to deal with the dangers. He did not have the heaven-defying aptitude that Fang Xingjian had and could ignore the heavenly barriers. However, he was also a level 27 expert. The second young master had originally wanted to use Mr. Shun's power to negotiate with him, but now the second young master's face was ashen. He knew that he was in big trouble. As for Patriarch Gao Zishuan, he recalled the terror of that attack just now and bowed to Fang Xingjian with a face full of fear and trepidation. "Thank you for your help, Senior Fang." The eldest young master, Gao Anha, wore an awkward expression as he transmitted an information current. "Father, this Lord Fang Xingjian has just completed his second transition this year. He's only 17 years old." "What?" Gao Clan's clan had looked at Fang Xingjian in great astonishment. He found it hard to believe that Fang Xingjian's age was as he looked, that he was only 17 years old. However, Fang Xingjian's lips twitched even more impatiently as he said, "All right, quickly bring me the azure dragon scale. I still have a lot of things to do." With that, his gaze suddenly turned toward the second young master, Gao Ankong. Gao Ankong trembled under Fang Xingjian's gaze. He retreated a few steps and said, "What do you want?" "Nothing." Fang Xingjian said, "I just want to ask you, what level is the first prince at now?" "Humph. The first prince is extremely talented and has already entered seclusion for the final push. He'll be able to attain the divine level in at most half a year's time." Saying this, Gao Ankong became more confident. "Fang Xingjian, if you're smart, you should help me to assist the first prince now. In the future, it won't be a problem for you to achieve meteoric success." Fang Xingjian chuckled, and with a flash of sword light, a pool of blood burst out from Gao Ankong's knee. Gao Ankong could not help but drop to his knees. "Ah!" Gao Ankong let out a cry of pain, but when he saw Fang Xingjian's gaze, which was filled with murderous intent, he did not dare to say another word. Just then, another figure dashed over. With a thunderous and earth-shaking aura, it was obvious that this was also a conferred knight. It was Pearl City's City Lord. Pearl City's City Lord looked at the ruins before him, as well as the people from Gao Clan. In the end, he cupped his hands toward Gao Zishuan and said, "Brother Gao, what on earth happened? That earlier attack was too terrifying. Is it because you've improved again?" Gao Zishuan waved his hand, nodded in the direction of Fang Xingjian, and said, "This is the Great Western Region's Fang Xingjian, the inventor of the rebirth sword technique." Earlier on, with a slash of his sword, the clouds in the sky split apart, revealing the scenery beyond the 9 heavens. Pearl City's City Lord looked at Fang Xingjian in astonishment. It was because of Fang Xingjian's identity and also because of the astonishment from that sword attack. He took a step forward and asked, "Fang Xingjian, Mr." He hesitated for a moment before addressing Fang Xingjian as Mr. Could that sword attack earlier be the legacy recorded on the Pantheon Monument? That's right. It's the prodigious astral divine powers recorded on the Pantheon Monument. Seeing Pearl City's City Lord's eager expression, Fang Xingjian asked, "City Lord, you wish to have a taste of my sword technique?" Pearl City's City Lord was also a level 25 conferred knight. However, right now, before Fang Xingjian, he was acting like a child. After his thoughts were exposed, he scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "I'm also someone who cultivates sword arts. I've long heard that Mr. has extraordinary talent in sword arts, and that your sword arts have reached perfection. Now that I've met you today, I'm tempted to ask Mister for some guidance in sword arts. Then make your move. All right. Pearl City's City Lord did not say anything else. He drew out the long sword at his waist, and with a flick of his wrist, Sword Light drew out streams of sharp sword net, encompassing toward Feng Xingjian. The sword technique he performed was known as the Milky Way sword technique. It was a killing technique passed down in his clan, a powerful sword technique that was never taught to outsiders. However, he had just performed a sword net when Feng Xingjian also flicked his wrist, condensing water vapor into a water sword. At the next moment, Sword Light crisscrossed, forming a sword net that encompassed the sky, encompassing toward the City Lord. What? Pearl City's City Lord looked at this scene in astonishment. He could not understand how Feng Xingjian was able to perform the exact same sword move as him. The two sword nets collided, and the clanging sounds of swords clashing rang out incessantly. Under the sword cheese, countless walls and rocks within a range of several hundred meters were all slashed into pieces. This Milky Way sword technique imitated the starry sky that had existed in ancient times, using sword light to imitate starlight to kill enemies. Pearl City's City Lord's sword stance changed once again, turning into a myriad of sword light that pierced toward Feng Xingjian's body like many meteors. However, it was the same as before. With a flick of the long sword in Feng Xingjian's hand, it also brought about a myriad of starlight, clashing against Pearl City's City Lord's longsword. Each time the sword tips collided intensely, it was as if they had collided at the same time. It was as if densely packed starlight had lit up and then been extinguished. Each time the sword light exploded, it would cause the ground to tremble, and large areas of ruins would be turned into dust by the sword light. Chapter 369. Pearl City's City Lord kept on changing his sword moves. It was as if stars were revolving around him, shining brightly within a range of several hundred meters. However, no matter what move he performed, Feng Xingjian would be able to immediately perform the same move. Moreover, Feng Xingjian seemed to be more experienced and familiar with the moves, as if he had been cultivating for several decades. Feng Xingjian's speed of picking up sword techniques had already been extremely fast. After attaining the second level of the Mystical Prince, his aptitude had become even stronger and his cultivation speed had become even faster. Right now, he could even pick up the Pearl City's City Lord sword technique with just one look. Very soon, Pearl City's City Lord finished performing all 27 moves of the Astral Sword technique. In the end, Sword Light burst out and both of them retreated. Pearl City's City Lord looked at Feng Xingjian in disbelief and could not help but ask, "Mister, why are you able to perform my clan's Milky Way sword technique?" He had known that the melancholic monarch was proficient in the ancient way of the stars, and that his clan's astral sword technique was also comprehended from the stars in the past. Therefore, he had wanted to spar with Feng Xingjian to comprehend the profoundness of the stars and strengthen his Milky Way sword technique. However, he had not expected that Feng Xingjian would be displaying the exact same sword technique. He could not help but think, could it be that this Feng Xingjian is also a member of our clan? Could it be that he is an illegitimate child of father or grandfather? Looking at Pearl City's City Lord's astonished and doubtful gaze, Feng Xingjian swung his long sword and the water sword scattered onto the ground, disappearing. He said, "This sword technique is called the Milky Way sword technique. It's quite interesting. I just saw the City Lord display a move, so I displayed a move and slowly learned it." Slowly picked it up? You've learned the Milky Way sword technique after seeing me perform it once? Pearl City's City Lord was not the only one who looked at Feng Xingjian in disbelief. The other members of Gao clan also looked at Feng Xingjian in disbelief, as if they had just heard a fantasy story. This was his clan's sword technique, and he had even synthesized 2 sets of killing techniques into it. To think that Feng Xingjian had managed to learn it after seeing it once? When had they ever seen such a monstrous talent? If he could learn someone else's swordsmanship just by looking at it once, Wouldn't that mean that he would be able to learn everyone else's swordsmanship as long as they used it? Isn't this a little too terrifying? At that moment, Elder Skyfire finally ran over with a large piece of blue azure dragon scale. However, he had only taken a few steps when he felt his body lighten. The azure dragon scale in his arms had disappeared. A rumbling sound came from the sky. When they looked up, they could only see a white line connecting to the south, leaving only a sound wave that traveled from afar and into everyone's ears. I'll have to trouble you guys to send Anderson back to the great western region. Fang Xingjian? What a peerless beauty. The head of the Gao family, Gao Zishuan, turned to look at the second young master and sneered. He violated the family rules, went against his superiors, and colluded with the enemy. Lock him up. Also, where is that Anderson? I'll go and see him myself. He cut across the sky with his powerful physical body, and long shock waves trailed behind him. As he collided with the sounds of thunder, the clouds under his feet seethed incessantly. Simultaneously, Fang Xingjian started to cultivate the Milky Way sword technique in his mind. His current sword arts battle system consisted of the Zenith Light Sword formation for long-range attacks, the Ether Sword ripples for medium to short-range attacks, and the Prodigious Demolition Sword for close combat. He needed to strengthen the related abilities of each sword technique and not turn all three sword techniques into an all-round sword technique. Just like that, he would continue to strengthen the unique characteristics of these three sword techniques. He would then be able to synthesize the three sword techniques at level 29, when his ether synchronization rate was at 100%. His sword arts would then improve tremendously once again. This was also the cultivation path for most knights. After they reached level 29, they would usually only have one killing technique for battle. Although Fang Xingjian's strongest means were the Terra Ingurgitation, the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, and the Heaven's Volition Sword Intent, these were not his greatest potential. His greatest potential was still in his sword arts. There would come a day when his sword arts would surpass these means. But before that, what he needed to do was to continue to strengthen his sword arts. Four sword techniques like the Milky Way sword technique, which took the path of sword light, he would synthesize them into the Zenith Light sword formation to increase the long-range destructive prowess of the light swords. When he returned to the great western city, the skill seed representing the Zenith Light sword formation and the skill seed representing the Milky Way sword technique collided fiercely in his consciousness. Right now, Fang Xingjian's ether synchronization rate had reached 50%, and the success rate of synthesis was also 50%. This time around, he was quite lucky and successfully synthesized the two sword techniques. Fang Xingjian still could not be bothered to change the name and called it the Zenith Light Sword Formation. After the synthesis, the prowess of the Zenith Light Sword Formation would be even stronger, and the light swords it shot out would contain the prowess of astral radiation. After returning to the training room and looking at the azure dragon scale in his hand, Fang Xingjian broke into a satisfied smile. This time around, not only would he be able to help him cultivate the third level of the mystical prince, but he would also be able to hinder the first prince's cultivation and the Gao clan's submission. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. However, hindering the first prince's cultivation was just something he did in passing. The most important thing was still his own cultivation. Thinking of this, Fang Xingjian started to smelt the materials, preparing to cultivate the third level of the mystical prince. This time around, he spent even more time. After a total of 12 hours, densely packed mystical prince had already covered Fang Xingjian's hands and extended to the upper part of his back, exuding layers of intense fluorescent light. Fang Xingjian could sense that each and every particle in his body seemed to be formed from countless ether particles. These ether particles seemed to be the smallest physical units in the world. However, they were not particles, nor were they waves. Instead, they were emitting layers of waves, exchanging energy and information with the ether particles in the outside world. The mystical prince increased the efficiency of the exchange, allowing Fang Xingjian's cultivation speed to be even faster. However, this time around, Fang Xingjian could sense that not only had the efficiency of the exchange increased, but he could also sense that the information being exchanged seemed to have been filtered in a special way. He could sense that a lot of the ether particles in the surroundings were junk information, such as memories and general knowledge. However, right now, most of them had become information related to sword arts. The third level of the mystical prince allows the exchange of ether particles to have an additional filtering function. Where was Fang Xingjian's current location? This was the Regional Academy's sacred land. Over the past 200 years, countless experts had cultivated here and left behind many sword arts comprehensions. Right now, he could sense the sword theories in the air gushing into his brain under the guidance of the mystical prince, allowing his sword arts level to constantly improve. The third level of the mystical prince has not only allowed my cultivation aptitude to rise once again, but even my sword arts cultivation has an additional passive growth effect. Fang Xingjian nodded in satisfaction. Suddenly, with a clench of one hand, water vapor condensed into a long sword. He had already started to cultivate a set of sword technique that he had scanned in the library, the Great Sun Divine Sword. He planned to synthesize this high-temperature sword technique into his ether sword ripples. Chapter 370. When Fang Xingjian cultivated the Great Sun Divine Sword, he felt that it was different from usual. The air was filled with all sorts of experiences regarding the Great Sun Divine Sword, aiding his cultivation. Clearly, this was the experience of the experts who had cultivated the Great Sun Divine Sword in the Holy Land in the past 200 years. Excellent, excellent, excellent. To think that the third level of the mystical prince has such a miraculous effect. Whatever I think of in my mind, they'll be able to filter out the direction of the exchange of information using ether particles, aiding my thoughts and greatly increasing the effects of my cultivation. This effect was far too terrifying. Fang Xingjian only spent 5 hours to cultivate the Great Sun Divine Sword to level 40. Then, he was lucky enough to synthesize it with the ether sword ripples, causing the highest temperature of the ether sword ripples to increase by a few more degrees. Sensing the astonishing effects of the third level of the mystical prince, Fang Xingjian continued to cultivate incessantly, strengthening his sword arts bit by bit. His battle prowess kept on increasing as if it was flying. He felt that, with the zenith light sword formation, ether sword ripples, prodigious demolition sword, and the reinforcement from the unparalleled sword intent, Apex, he would be able to defeat a level 26 Confer Knight. 3 days later, in the canteen of the Regional Academy, Fang Xingjian sat in the dining room, and there were a few plates of grilled meat that had been cut up neatly before him. Diana was still wearing her chef's robe, grilling the meat with both hands while introducing the dishes before her. Her golden ponytail bounced back and forth behind her head, filled with vigor. This was taken from the highest quality golden wild boar, from the meat that surrounds its heart. Each golden wild boar can only get 100 grams of this kind of meat. The fascia is connected together, so it has the strongest chewiness. This is the neck part of the pork neck. I used roast charcoal to roast it. In order to fully bring out the flavor of the pork neck, I roasted it for a long time to stimulate the crispness. Try it. There's also this fiery bison meat. The lean and fat parts of this meat are evenly distributed. I specially roasted it to 26 degrees Celsius and waited for the oil to melt so that the gravy could be absorbed. In addition to the original 12 spices, I've invented a new fruit sauce. A total of 18 fruits are mixed together. Try it. Fang Xingjian tasted them one by one, occasionally revealing an expression of admiration, causing Diana to smile happily. At this moment, Diana's face was covered in soot, but it was still difficult to hide her elegance. In particular, her large, serious eyes gave her a special charm. Fang Xingjian nodded and said, "Not bad. I didn't drag you here in vain. I have to thank you as well. If it weren't for you, I don't know how long it would take for me to be able to use ingredients so casually." Diana looked at Fang Xingjian hesitantly. Fang Xingjian saw her hesitation and said, "Just say it. What's the matter?" I hope to continue operating the barbecue shop. I want more people to eat my new dishes. Fang Xingjian continued to chew on the barbecued meat, as if he had not heard what Diana had said. Just as Diana's brows drooped down, thinking that there was no hope, Fang Xingjian said calmly, "Go and discuss it with Robert. Take it as my investment. If you're going to open it, then open it well." Thank you, Xingjian. Diana smiled, breaking into a radiant smile like the sun. Just then, Robert walked over with a short and fat man. Diana smiled and backed off, but the short and fat man kept his eyes fixed on Diana, as if he was captivated by her appearance. It was only when Robert coughed softly that the short and fat man regained his senses. He thought to himself, "What a beautiful girl. It's a pity that she's already with Fang Xingjian." However, when he lifted his head, he had already put on a smile and said, "Lord Xingjian, I'm Johnny from the Great Western City Guards Institution. This time around, I come to trouble you with some matters." Fang Xingjian did not reply to Johnny directly. Instead, he ate a piece of pork neck meat. The strong charred aroma and texture seethed in his mouth, causing a hint of a smile to break out on his face. When Johnny saw this, he thought to himself, Robert was right. This Fang Xingjian is in the best mood when he's eating delicacies, and he's also the easiest to talk to. Fang Xingjian threw a glance at Johnny and asked, "What do you need my help with?" "It's like this. Didn't Lord kill an escaped convict at the barbecue shop previously? He's a follower of the Terrene Shrine. After our investigations, we've captured another of his accomplices and discovered that he's not an ordinary escaped convict. This time around, he was only able to escape with the help of followers from outside." Fang Xingjian nodded and said as he ate, "Therefore, you want to capture followers from outside. Although the Terrene Shrine has been wiped out, those who managed to escape have been secretly expanding in various parts of the Empire. Wiping out the followers of the Terrene Shrine has always been an important task for the Empire. However, this time around, we're worried that we don't have enough manpower to capture them. Therefore, we'd like to invite Lord Fang Xingjian for help." Fang Xingjian's lips twitched as he asked, "Other than me, is there anyone else?" Johnny replied obediently, "Other than you and a conferred knight from our vanguard, we've also invited 2 other conferred knights." "I don't have the time. I'm not going," Fang Xingjian rejected directly. He did not even have enough time for his cultivation, so how would he have the time to catch thieves? However, after he said this, Johnny did not leave obediently. Instead, he continued to wait there. Robert walked up slowly and whispered into Fang Xingjian's ear, "Lord, it said that this group of survivors from the Terrene Shrine has a piece of sunstone. Didn't you ask me previously if there's anything that can increase the rate of cultivation of the effulgence weapon? This piece of sunstone should be able to do it." Although Fang Xingjian's ether divine art had great potential, it was not considered a sword technique. Therefore, compared to Fang Xingjian's other techniques, the rate of cultivation was not fast. Therefore, he decided not to cultivate at all. It was because at the same time, cultivating sword techniques would obviously be able to help him increase his abilities. Therefore, Fang Xingjian got Robert to ask around to see if there was anything that could increase the rate of cultivation of the effulgence weapon, and the sunstone was one of them. The sunstone was a special type of stone. By chance, it would be compatible with the waves of sunlight, and a tremendous amount of light waves would be stored in its body. It could be absorbed by conferred knights directly and used to strengthen the ether effulgence weapon in their bodies. However, this item was far too rare. Therefore, Robert had asked around and found that there was no such item in the entire Great Western City. He had not expected that a group of survivors from the Terrene Shrine would have such an item. However, Robert added, "This information was spread by a spy from the Terrene Shrine. It should be reliable." Fang Xingjian nodded and asked, "Can't you buy it?" Robert smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I've asked many people, but there's no market for it." "I understand." Fang Xingjian said to Johnny, "Count me in. When do we make our move?" "Tomorrow morning," Johnny said happily. "In order to avoid alerting the enemy, I hope that you won't reveal any information." Chapter 371. Don't worry, but I'll be taking the sunstone. Johnny nodded and continued. Also, this is a secret operation. Sir, it's best for you to hide your identity. Fang Xingjian nodded to indicate that he understood. Of course, he knew that most conferred knights would hide their identities when it came to exterminating evil sects and factions. After all, this was just like the anti-narcotics police and anti-terrorism police. If they did not hide their identities, their enemies would probably be as numerous as a hornet's nest. It was even easier for conferred knights to hide their identities. They had long surpassed the level of knights, and their control over their muscles, bones, vital energy, and blood were all at an extraordinary level. Take Fang Xingjian, for example. By shrinking his bones slightly and changing the position of his facial muscles, he would be able to look completely different. However, for safety's sake, Fang Xingjian still consulted head of department James. Exterminating the Terrene Shrine? James nodded and said, the Terrene Shrine has been on the decline, and there are basically no more top-notch experts left. With your means, it's not very possible for them to kill you. However, they all believe in the Terrene Shrine and are not afraid of death. They even have secret arts that allow them to sacrifice their own lifespan. You'll have to be careful. There won't be any level 28 or 29 experts, right? No, there aren't many level 27 experts, James said firmly. James said resolutely, when we wiped out the Terrene Shrine, 99% of their manuals were destroyed. After so many years, we've beaten them to the point where they've only gone through the second transition and lost most of their legacies. This time around, you're considered lucky to have encountered a level 26 one. Fang Xingjian would occasionally look for James to spar with him, and James was very clear about Fang Xingjian's battle prowess. Saying this, James suddenly smiled. Oh, right. Xingjian, when are you going to let me take a look at the remaining mysteries of the Pantheon Monument? I was just about to talk to you about this. How about selling it to the Academy in one go? In the past, Fang Xingjian did not lack money. However, now that he wanted to cultivate the Mystical Prince, he did not have enough money. Just the first 3 levels of the Mystical Prince had already cost him 600,000 gold. Moreover, as more and more academies had given the authorizations, the royalties this year had also gradually decreased. It was unknown how long it would take for him to gather the over 400,000 gold needed for the 4th level. Therefore, this time around, Fang Xingjian was planning on using the secrets to the Pantheon Monument to exchange for money. James narrowed his eyes and asked, "How much are you going to offer?" Fang Xingjian said, "I'll tell you all the secrets of the 7 levels. My offer is 10 million gold. Too many." James widened his eyes and said angrily, "Be **starred, 10 million gold. Do you want me to sell the entire sword arts department? It can't be that exaggerated." Fang Xingjian shrugged and said, "How about this? You can pay me in installments within half a year." Half a year? James frowned slightly. Waving his hand, he said, "Go back and prepare for the quest. I'll think about it. 10 million gold is too expensive. Of course, we can't let you bear the burden alone. The entire Academy can learn the prodigious astral divine powers waves. Let everyone bear the burden together. If each department pays 1 or 2 million, they will definitely be able to gather enough." James shook his head. 10 million gold is too expensive. The Academy won't agree to it. Fang Xingjian said, "It's worth it. A few days ago, I performed the power of the level 5 prodigious astral divine powers waves in BI's Continent's Pearl City. You can ask around. If there's a need to take a look, I can also demonstrate it. I believe that after you know of its prowess, the Academy will definitely be willing to fork out 10 million gold." James frowned. I'll go and ask around, but it's probably not possible. Don't hold too much hope. Even if it's the waves of a divine level expert, 10 million gold is still too expensive. This has already surpassed what the Academy can afford. There probably isn't a single aristocrat in the great Western region who can afford it, let alone the Academy. Haha, this is a good opportunity. With this waves and more people cultivating it, even the first prince might be able to go up against it. Wouldn't it be good to use the Academy's money to increase the second prince's abilities? James remained silent. Fang Xingjian smiled in an unconcerned manner. He knew that after the upper echelon found out about the prowess of the level 5 Terra Ingurgitation, they would definitely not give up on this divine level legacy. Although the prowess of the prodigious astral divine powers waves was unparalleled, Feng Xingjian still dared to sell it. Firstly, this waves was too profound. Even with Feng Xingjian's talent, the fact that he had been cultivating nonstop for 24 hours had seen the starry sky and had the effects of the mystical prince, he would still need half a month to 1 month to advance by 1 level. Moreover, the people in the academy did not have any mystical prince, nor did they have Feng Xingjian's talent. They had also never seen the real starry sky before. Their cultivation speed was far inferior to Feng Xingjian's. Secondly, Terra Ingurgitation still had its limits. However, Feng Xingjian was more confident in his sword arts talent. His foundation to attain the divine level in the future would still be his sword arts, and his sword arts would eventually surpass Terra Ingurgitation. Thirdly, it was as he had said. Although he said that he was selling it to the academy was still under Governor Devitt's control. However, the lady with pigtails frowned and said, smiling face, this time around, we're going to be dealing with the followers of the Serene Shrine, right? Those people who are not afraid of death are very troublesome. Can conferred knights below level 25 also participate? Level 25 knights could undergo regeneration and physical modification, condense specialty seeds, and open up the path from a human to a god. Most people also felt that there would be a qualitative difference between those above and below level 25. The lady with pigtails looked at Feng Xingjian with a gaze filled with dissatisfaction. It was clear that she did not wish to bring along this guy with her to deal with the Serene Shrine. Chapter 372. Smiling Face smiled, as if he wanted to say a few words to ease the atmosphere. However, Feng Xingjian had already made his move. Strong gales blew, and waves of scorching air currents came from the air. There seemed to be a faint charred smell from the high temperature. The lady in plates had already activated her force field at almost the instant the strong gales blew. Simultaneously, she retreated a distance of 100 meters. However, she had just stabilized herself when she saw Feng Xingjian swinging his hand. He was holding onto one of her braids. Her eyes opened wide. She had not been able to see how Feng Xingjian had made his move earlier. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "Since I'm able to take your hair, I'm only able to strike your head once." Throwing a glance at the lady in plates, he continued, "I don't need a second move to kill someone of your level." Lad, an intense killing intent flashed on the lady in plate's face. She had never been humiliated like this before. "It's true that I've underestimated you earlier. However, I'm usually only at 1/3 of my true battle prowess. Do you dare to fight against me at full power?" Feng Xingjian looked at her coldly and opened up his palm. A stone spike shot out from the ground under his feet, turning into a stone sword. Then, with the reinforcement of his swordless path specialty, it became a level 19 inferior divine weapon. Although he had already combined the Thunderbolt sword technique, mountain shifting sword, aquatic sword formation, and lightless sword into the prodigious demolition sword, the condensed demolition sword light was merely the amalgamation of the 4 powers of wind, earth, water, and fire. Feng Xingjian could still use the powers from each of them individually. Seeing that the two of them were in a state of mutual hostility, Smiling Face scratched his head and said, all right. We're here to deal with the Serene Shrine. Why is there an internal strife before we've even met the people from the Serene Shrine? Give me some face. Let's complete the mission happily and get our respective rewards. Isn't that good?" As a level 26 conferred knight, Smiling Face could be said to be the strongest out of the 4 people present. Although the lady in plates was infuriated by Feng Xingjian's arrogance, she did not wish to offend Smiling Face. She merely let out a cold laugh and said, "Some people become so arrogant that they don't know how high the heavens are and how vast the earth is just because they are fast. They don't know that in this world, being a little faster doesn't make one invincible." All right. Don't talk so much. Smiling Face clapped his hands, gathering everyone's attention. Then he said, based on our informant's information, one of the Terrene Shrine strongholds is over 30 kilometers ahead. They have at least 2 second transition experts. Therefore, they sent the 4 of us over to ensure that nothing goes wrong. However, we still have to be careful. The Terrene Shrine has second transition jobs that have been secretly passed down. Their abilities might not be comparable to ours, but most of them are sinister and mysterious. Their vitality is extremely strong. Everyone, please don't be careless and fail miserably. Smiling Face reminded them once again. However, he realized that other than Fong Xingjian, Plates and Old Man had already headed forward. Smiling Face could not help but let out a helpless cry and laugh. The 4 conferred knights advanced at high speed, running toward the Terrene Shrine stronghold. With their leg strength and speed, a mere 30 kilometers was far too short. However, in order not to alert the enemy, they slowed down during the last 5 kilometers. They were like ghosts, darting through the forests and mountain rocks, heading toward the stronghold. It was a cave located halfway up the mountain. Standing at the entrance, Smiling Face looked at the bottomless cave and said, "This is the place. There should only be one exit in the entire cave. In order to prevent any of them from escaping, let's leave one person here to guard the exit." Fong Xingjian looked at the structure of the mountain and thought that if it was not for the fact that they wanted to obtain a lot of resources from the Terrene Shrine, such as the sunstone that he wanted, and if they only wanted to kill them, they would be able to destroy the mountain and kill most of the followers. Old Man said, "Then I'll stay behind. I'm getting old and don't like fighting and killing anymore." Smiling Face chuckled and said, "Then we'll have to trouble Senior to stay behind. Other than us, please kill everyone else who dashes out from the cave." Therefore, Old Man was left behind to guard the cave entrance while Fong Xingjian and the other 2 walked slowly into the cave. Several kilometers underground, the entire stone wall was covered in layers of gray flesh and blood. These pieces of flesh and blood kept on twitching as if they were alive. In the center of the flesh and blood, layers of gray flesh and blood formed a huge blood throne. The figure on the throne slowly knocked on the armrest formed from flesh and blood and said, "Are the Empire's conferred knights here?" Before him, there was a flower formed from flesh and blood, and the voices of Smiling Face, Old Man, and the others kept on ringing out. 1 level 26 conferred knight, 2 level 25, and 1 level 24. "Are you sure that there are no more reinforcements?" Under the throne, a man's face kept on trembling, and his eyes were filled with terror. What was even more terrifying was that everything below his head had completely disappeared. There were only a few tentacles of flesh and blood connected to his neck, supporting his head up and facing the shadow on the throne. His mouth opened and closed, as if he was saying something soundless. "Kill me, kill me." Under the throne, 3 huge figures half knelt there, exuding a terrifying pressure. What was even more astonishing was their appearances. All of them looked like lions, tigers, wild wolves, black bears, and other animals that were pieced together. They looked like synthetic animals or animal zombies. One of the lion-headed monsters lifted its head, looked at the shadow on the throne, and said, "Lord Bishop, do you need us to go and deal with them now?" The figure on the throne let out a hum and said, "Number 1, deal with the level 26 knight. Number 9, deal with that woman. Number 13, deal with the old man outside." The one known as Number 1 was a lion-headed monster, while Number 9 was covered in scales and had 5 snake heads on his head. Number 13 was the tallest among the 3, covered in dense fur and spikes. His face, which was a combination of a wild boar and a black bear, was filled with brutality and ruthlessness. Hearing that, Number 9 stuck out his tongue a few times and asked, "Don't we need to deal with the level 24 brat? No matter how much they cultivate, those below level 25 will still have mortal bodies. As long as we deal with the 3 conferred knights, we'll be able to kill the level 24 brat at any time. On the contrary, if we waste our energy on dealing with the small fries, resulting in us not being able to win against the other 3 conferred knights. It would be a mistake. The figure on the throne said slowly, "Go, my gray knights. Don't disappoint me." Yes. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh sounds rang out, and the 3 gray knights disappeared with a flash. However, in the quiet hall of flesh and blood, laughter rang out. Hee hee hee. You've done well, lad. To think that you have 3 successful products. The figure on the throne opened his eyes abruptly and discovered that a slender lady with green hair and eyes had suddenly appeared before him. She was floating before him. Chapter 373. Who is it? The person on the throne tapped out with a finger, and 4 tree-like tentacles immediately appeared in the flesh hall, coiling out toward the woman. However, that green-haired and green-eyed woman was like a clump of illusions. The huge tentacles swept past her, able to see her, but unable to touch her. An existence that can't be contacted. The Chaos Witch? The witch who hides in the darkness, changes history, witnesses history, and guides history? The figure on the throne said slowly, "Why have you come to my place?" Hee hee, it's been a long time since I've seen someone in this world who can reach this level. To think that there's still someone in this era who can successfully perform and solidify the level 7 black magic, possession of life from an alternate world. What a genius, the green-haired woman said with a grin. The green-haired woman giggled and said, "If I let you continue your research like this, you might be able to create something incredible that might even change the entire continent." The figure on the throne slowly stood up, revealing his true appearance. It was a face that was completely covered in gray flesh, and countless tentacles of various sizes grew from his forehead and the corners of his eyes, all the way to his entire body. There were tentacles of various sizes all over his body. The smallest was like a strand of hair, while the largest was the size of a finger. They kept on curling and seething on the surface of his body, looking extremely disgusting. Why? The Chaos, which also wants to save the world? The green-haired witch smiled. Hee hee, the world doesn't need saving. I'm only here to see the main character of the new era. The main character of a new era? The Terrene Shrine's bishop laughed out loud. So that's how it is. Even the representative of chaos has determined that I'll be the main character of the new era? Ha ha, our decision was right. Compared to staying in a country the size of a palm, we can only continue to develop by walking out. Black Mage King, have you ever thought of our achievements today? Amidst his maniacal laughter, the countless tentacles on his body trembled incessantly. There seemed to be several tens of cries of the elderly, the young, the male, and the female coming out from his body. 30 years ago, in the Uranless Federation, the Mage Country, a group of gray-robed mages left their hometown for the sake of ambition, research, and freedom, coming to the Empire. They concealed their identities and set up a religious organization called the Terrene Shrine. Relying on the black magic that the gray-robed mages grasped, the number of followers in the Terrene Shrine increased rapidly like a rolling snowball. Within a few years, they had spread throughout the entire country. However, just as the gray-robed mages thought that they were about to dominate the country and could research black magic in peace to obtain the power of the gods, the Empire discovered their human experimentation base. A bloody base, cruel experiments, and all kinds of twisted and powerful monsters. The war had started, and the Terrene Shrine had no choice but to rebel. However, it was only then that they discovered that the Empire's hidden powers far surpassed their imagination, causing them to pay a terrible price. What was more frightening was that the Holy Sea of Truth had also intervened. From then on, the gray-robe sorcerer was almost extinct among the many sorcerers. The bishop laughed louder and louder, and his whole body seemed to be trembling. Alexander, the name of the emperor, just you wait. Soon, the whole continent will be shrouded in gray terror. On the other side, not long after Feng Xingjian's group of 3 walked, 3 forks appeared in front of them. Smiling face touched his mouth and said, "What if we get surrounded and attacked if we split up?" The lady in plates said proudly, "They're just some rats that are hiding here and there." 25 years ago, it was proven that their battle prowess is inferior to the Empire's conferred knights. What's there to be afraid of? Seeing that the lady in plates had walked into the tunnel on the right, Smiling Face said helplessly, "Then let's split up. Remember, if you encounter any danger that you can't handle, immediately head back the way you came from to look for reinforcements." With that, he and Fong Xingjian also entered the tunnel in the middle and left respectively. The lady in plates walked for several tens of meters and saw over 10 howling wild beasts dashing toward her. She let out a cold laugh, put her 5 fingers together, and pierced out like a great spear. The 10 or so wild beasts exploded one by one across space. The entire tunnel seemed to have turned into a slaughterhouse. Can't even withstand a single blow. As they continued to venture deeper, a few more waves of wild beasts dashed over. Each of these wild beasts had bloodshot eyes and were extremely violent. Moreover, they did not fear death. However, they were at most at the level of first transition knights. They were far from being comparable to the lady in plates. The lady in plates casually attacked across space, and these wild beasts exploded one by one. After walking for over 100 meters, a huge bear with a height of over 5 meters and fur that was like metal dashed toward her with a furious bellow. Its tremendous weight stomped on the tunnel, and each step it took caused the earth to tremble. It was as if a tank was charging over. This kind of bear monster could almost bring down a city wall. However, the lady in plates merely curled her lips and used her hand as a spear. Over 100 specialty seeds rose up, and at the next moment, she met the bear monster's attack head-on. With a loud bang, the lady in plates' right arm struck the bear monster's head like a super big drill. Then swoosh, swoosh, swoosh sounds rang out incessantly, and as blood and flesh splattered, the lady in plates passed through the bear monster's body, leaving behind a badly mutilated bear monster that fell to the ground. Trash! Throwing a cold glance at the corpse on the ground, the lady in plates continued to walk forward. However, she discovered that a human figure was slowly appearing before her. It was the pig bear guy whom the bishop had addressed as number 13. Looking at the creature that was a mixture of human, bear, and pig, the lady in plates revealed a disgusted expression. "You dregs from the Serene shrine are still as disgusting as you were 25 years ago, paying attention to appearances and being bewitched by them. This is the stupidity of you heretics," the pig bear guy said in a low, muffled voice. The pig bear man spoke in a low, muffled voice. "Female knights of the Empire, prepare to receive the wrath of the gods." As he spoke, his face revealed a fanatical expression, and he seemed to be trembling in excitement. Trying to act mysterious. The lady in plates let out a cold snort and took a step forward. She pierced out like a drill, and her right hand pierced through the pig bear guy's chest, leaving behind a huge penetrating wound. Trash! The lady in plates threw a glance, and then continued to walk forward. However, she suddenly turned abruptly and put up her hands before herself. With an explosive bang, she collided into the wall. The wall cracked out in all directions with her body as the center, as if it had turned into a crater. Simultaneously, she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood and looked at the pig bear guy in disbelief. What kind of strange strength is this? And that wound? The penetrating wound on the pig bear guy's chest slowly healed up as if he had never been injured before. This regenerative ability? No, it's not regenerative. This guy's body. The pig bear guy wore a blissful and peaceful expression. He looked at the astonished female knight and said passionately, "Do you see this? Do you understand now? This is the power that God has bestowed upon us. The entire world will be astonished by this power." Chapter 374. The lady in plates looked coldly at the boar bear guy. She opened up her 5 fingers, and streams of air currents continued to gather, eventually turning into an air-long spear that continued to spin at high speed. From afar, it was as if the lady in plates was holding onto a large section of a tornado. It kept on spinning at high speed, bringing up strong gales, causing the entire corridor to be filled with whistling sounds of hurricanes. It was the lady in plate's killing technique, dragon breath. However, this was just the beginning. The muscles all over the lady in plate's body continued to swell up and down. She smiled coldly and said, "Monster, do you know why the Terrene Shrine was destroyed by us? It's because when compared to a Confer Knight's power, trash like you guys are really Asterisk King weak. Wind. God. Boom." Countless big mouths opened up on the lady in plate's body, and each of them was engulfing and exhaling air crazily toward the outside world. She instantly seemed to have turned into a jet plane, holding onto the tornado long spear and floating up slowly. This was the transformation killing technique that the lady in plates had painstakingly cultivated, Wind God. The human body's transformation required an extremely high level of flexibility, and all transformation-type killing techniques had an extremely high requirement for flexibility. However, it was still very worth it to spend most of one's energy on flexibility. It was because conferred knights who cultivated transformation-type killing techniques would usually be able to unleash astonishing battle prowess after their transformation. The mouths all over her body kept on engulfing and exhaling air. Amidst her hideous laughter, the lady in plates was like a supersonic fighter jet. Air currents that were like shock waves spurted out from her back, and she passed by the boar bear guy's body while leaving behind a series of afterimages. Amidst an explosive boom, the boar bear guy's body, which had been sent flying at high speed by the tornado long spear, exploded in midair, turning into flesh and blood all over the ground. However, just as the lady in plates was about to turn and leave, her expression froze slightly. She stared at the flesh and blood all over the ground, as if she had seen something unbelievable. The flesh and blood swelled up, changed shape, and jumped about. In the blink of an eye, they once again gathered together, turning back into the boar bear guy. He even appeared to be unharmed. "You monster." If it was said that a level 25 conferred knight's body could be regenerated, then this monster had already surpassed the regeneration stage. It could be said to be reassembling itself. It was like a broken building block being reassembled time and time again. In that instant, the lady in plates was like a tempest goddess, piercing and charging back and forth. Amidst the terrifying whistling sounds, the strong gales kept hitting the ground, creating loud, banging sounds. The pigtailed lady had already used her tornado spear to smash the boar bear guy into a pile of minced meat. However, it was still useless. Looking at the boar bear man who had recovered once again, the plated lady said coldly, "What on earth are you? This is definitely not something that super rapid regeneration can do." She exclaimed inwardly, "This is no longer regeneration, but reconstitution of the body. Isn't this something that only level 29 conferred knights are able to do?" The strongest aspect of a level 29 conferred knight was their microscopic ability, which allowed them to reassemble their bodies at will. Other than the brain, they had no other weaknesses. Some top-notch experts could even reassemble their brains. It could be said that other than reaching the end of their lifespan, they were almost indestructible. Surprised? A female knight of the Empire. The pig bear man laughed. "Because I'm not just me. Every part of my body, every basic unit, has its own consciousness." In the next moment, thousands of voices rang out from the boar bear man's body. "Your so-called destruction, to us, is nothing more than a reassembly. Your attacks are completely ineffective. Now, we'll show you our attacks." With a soft sound, the pigtailed lady looked at her chest in a daze. She discovered that her right hand had pierced through her chest unknowingly and was holding on her heart, not letting go. The boar bear man's body clearly did not just consist of cells that could be reassembled freely. He could even use cells as a unit to infect other people's cells and control other people's bodies. The pig-tailed lady felt the increasing pressure on her heart and let out a furious bellow. Puffed sounds rang out, and blood spurted into the sky. Her arm, which had gone out of control, had been slashed off by her tornado spear. "It's useless." The boar bear man laughed savagely. "We've already followed your blood to the various parts of your body. Don't you understand? From the very beginning, when I first came into contact with you, my cells had already invaded your body. Ah, the pigtailed lady's entire body stiffened. She realized that she was unable to control her own limbs. B****. The pigtailed lady gritted her teeth and looked at the boar-bear man. She discovered that more and more parts of her body had gone out of control, and the uncontrollable parts were expanding crazily, heading straight for her head. Elsewhere, Feng Xingjian continued to head into the depths of the passageway. A few savage and twisted monsters would occasionally dash out from the pitch-black passageway, but they were all easily roasted into jerky by the zenith light sword formation on his back. Hearing the endless rumbling sounds coming from under his feet and sensing the trembling walls, Feng Xingjian thought to himself, the battles of the others are very intense. However, there doesn't seem to be anyone who has come to deal with me. Just then, another huge gorilla-like monster charged out with a furious bellow. When it saw the young Feng Xingjian, the monster stopped in its tracks and laughed out loud. After holding in here for so long, I can finally release my powers. Lad, don't think that I'm on the same level as those trash you dealt with previously. The gorilla patted its chest, releasing a thunderous, muffled sound. My ability is to make use of other people's speed. A hint of brutality flashed on its face, and it looked at Feng Xingjian like a cat catching a mouse. Are you afraid? The gorilla grinned. The mutual repulsion domain that I possess can allow other people's speed to be stacked onto mine. This means that no matter how fast my enemies are, they won't be able to be faster than me. Feng Xingjian was stunned for a moment before saying, this ability is too heaven-defying. Doesn't that mean that you can be faster than anyone else in the world? Have you finally understood how terrifying I am? The gorilla laughed coldly. That's why I'm the fastest person in the world. Do you understand now? It's useless for a person to just be fast. Only by being a little faster than anyone else can one be considered truly fast. With that, he pointed a finger at Feng Xingjian and said, right now, I've already set my mutual repulsion domain on you. I'm already faster than you. Faster than me? Feng Xingjian tilted his head and said, I keep feeling that your ability is a little unbelievable. Can you let me take a look? There's no other way. How can mortals like you possibly know how great the evil gods are? The prowess of black magic is far from what you guys can understand. It's a power that surpasses common sense and logic. The gorilla crossed his arms and smiled. Then I'll let you experience true extreme speed. No matter how you accelerate, you'll still discover that the other party is just a little faster than you. With that, the gorilla took a step forward and charged out fiercely toward Feng Xingjian. However, he had only taken a single step when he sensed that something was wrong. The moment he took a step forward, he felt as if everything had gone out of control. Everything before him was bizarre and dazzling, and he could not see anything clearly. He felt a terrifying pressure all over his body. Under the intense friction, his body felt as if it was going to be cooked, especially his internal organs. They seemed to have started to explode and disintegrate. What on earth is this? What kind of speed is this? Amidst a loud sound, the gorilla, who had not been able to react in time, smashed into the stone wall. The entire mountain wall seemed to tremble intensely, and the gorilla's body parts were scattered all over the mountain wall. Some of them were even deeply embedded into the mountain, making it hard to see clearly. Under the unprecedented high speed, the gorilla's body exploded and disintegrated after the collision. Feng Xingjian took a few glances at the minced flesh on the wall and thought, black magic? Is the Serene shrine related to mages as well? Chapter 375. Warriors modified from ferocious beasts? Feng Xingjian observed for a moment and thought to himself, to think that the mage's black magic can reach such a level? This is unbelievable. Even a level 25 conferred knight wouldn't be able to go through such a level of physical modification, let alone a target other than himself. Their abilities seem to be very interesting as well. Serene Shrine? This is getting more and more interesting. Not paying too much attention to the gorilla's corpse, Fang Xingjian sensed that the tremors were gradually calming down. He increased his speed slightly and continued to head deeper into the tunnel. Although he had only increased his speed slightly, Fang Xingjian's current speed was still very astonishing to others. Usually, with just 6 streams of light sweeping past, the monsters on his way would be instantly dismembered by the zenith light sword formation. After advancing for 2 to 3 kilometers, a dog-headed man suddenly leaped out. He had a height of over 3 meters, and 8 arms grew out of his back. His palms were pitch black, as if countless metals had been mixed into them. Each of his hands was holding onto an empire's divine weapon, each of them exuding their own unmoving waves. Drops of venom dripped down from the corner of his mouth. When they landed on the ground, they let out sizzling sounds and corroded a large area of the ground. With a furious bellow, the entire tunnel seemed to tremble. The 8 weapons each drew out graceful trajectories, piercing toward Fang Xingjian with 8 different powers. Powerful martial will gushed forth, as if he could sense a pack of wolves tearing at him. At the same time, it also contained the message from the dog-headed man, "Lad, I, Brother Dao, am protecting this place." No one can even think about. A soft swoosh rang out, and a hissing sound rippled in the air. It sounded like the wind blowing past leaves. Fang Xingjian had already crossed a distance of 100 meters. The dog-headed man was separated from his body and fell to the ground. Fresh blood spurted out incessantly from his wounds, and the 8 Empire's divine weapons in his hands were all shattered. After crossing a few hundred meters, Fang Xingjian's body froze for a moment. He then realized that he was surrounded by white spider silk, which was hard to see with the naked eye. A spider with a human head laughed out loud as it descended. "My spider silk is 50 times tougher than steel bars. Even a conferred knight wouldn't be able to break through after being trapped by so much spider silk." With a swoosh, 10 streams of ether sword ripples burst out in all directions with Fang Xingjian as the center. The white spider silk turned into fragments, and the sword ripples left behind 10 deep marks on the ground and walls. The human-headed spider cried out in alarm and was about to retreat when he realized that his head had been chopped off by a sword and was falling toward the ground. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of blades cutting through the air rang out incessantly. Fang Xingjian advanced quickly all the way. On the way, be it bears, gorillas, elephants, or other monsters modified from ferocious beasts, none of them could withstand a single strike from Fang Xingjian. However, more and more monster warriors swarmed towards Fang Xingjian's position. They could not kill enough of them, and they actually slowed down Fang Xingjian's speed. Elsewhere, in the underground hall of flesh and blood, the 3 gray knights had returned, and before them were 3 conferred knights. Plates, Smiling Face, and Old Man Plates and Old Man had each been dealt with by monster. The level 26 Smiling Face had initially had the upper hand, but after the other 2 monsters rushed over to join forces, he was defeated and captured. Other than their heads, the other parts of the 3 conferred knights' bodies were all covered by a layer of gray flesh. They knelt down respectfully before the throne, but their faces were filled with fury and savagery. Smiling Face no longer had a smile on his face. When a person discovered that his body was no longer under his control, he would naturally not be able to smile anymore. He threw a glance at the traitor who was left with only his head. The traitor was completely dead. He then turned to look at the bishop on the throne and said, "What on earth did you do? From what I know, the Terrene Shrine shouldn't have such an ability. Of course not in the past, because this is my latest creation." The archbishop stroked the antennae on his chin and said calmly, "But do you think that I'll explain it to you? Ha! Does God need to explain his intentions to ants?" Plates bellowed furiously. "The Empire won't let you off. Even if we die, other conferred knights will come. Level 27, level 28, or even level 29 conferred knights. I'll be waiting for you in hell." Right now, her body, which had been slashed open, had already recovered to normal. However, Even the regenerative abilities of a level 25 conferred knight were unable to stop the monsters from corroding her body. The bishop on the throne only shook his head. Ignorance is really scary. By the time they arrive, it'll be too late. By then, they'll only become my material. With that, he looked at level 26, smiling face, the knight with the highest level amongst the attackers today. Excellent. A level 26 conferred knight. What a rare material. With this, my black magic research will be able to progress further. Those fools from a mage association have given up on their pursuit of the truth for the sake of so-called ethics and morals. However, they don't know that in this world, only the truth is eternal and absolute. The so-called ethics and morals, society, and countries are all just illusions created by humans. How can these be mentioned in the same breath as the eternal world and the universe's truth? The bishop walked down slowly from the throne and put out his gray palm. His fingers, palm, and arms were all covered with tiny tentacles that kept on trembling as if they were laughing. Seeing the other party's palm coming toward him, smiling face's eyes suddenly lit up. Piercing light kept on extending out from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Violent martial will swept out, dashing into everyone's minds in that instant. Do you really think that you can win? When Smiling Face was facing the three monsters, Lion Head, Boar Bear, and Snake Head, he knew that it would be very difficult for him to win just by relying on his physical body. However, in order not to waste his energy, he had intentionally allowed himself to be captured and come to the lowest level. He had been holding back all this while, all for the sake of this unexpected attack. The reason why he had this confidence was because of the killing technique he had cultivated, spirit and body separation. It was a terrifying killing technique that could allow one's consciousness to separate from the physical body and exist independently. To Smiling Face, physical battles had never been his forte. His true battle style was to fight through the flow of his consciousness through his will. In that instant, streams of milky white light darted out from Smiling Face's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, turning into a human-shaped light shadow in midair. Martial will that was so powerful that it seemed to have turned into a material substance swept out in all directions with him as the center. I'll be accepting the results of your research. Chapter 376. Faced with the gushing willpower impact, the three gray knights let out a furious bellow, wanting to fend it off with all their might. However, willpower impact was purely a mental attack. It was a contest of wills, and it did not matter how strong one's physical body was. In terms of a contest of wills, Smiling Face was clearly an expert. The three monsters trembled under his willpower impact, unable to say a word. Blood flowed from their 7 apertures, as if their brains were going to evaporate. Even the gray flesh, which had been controlling the 3 conferred knights, kept on trembling and screaming under the impact of the white light. The wills in their cells seemed to have been doused with sulfuric acid, and they kept on being killed. However, Smiling Face's real target, the Serene Shrine's bishop, who was covered in disgusting tentacles, only spat out a mouthful of blood and looked coldly at Smiling Face, not saying a word. How is this possible? Even a level 27 conferred knight wouldn't just end up spitting out a mouthful of blood after receiving my willpower impact head-on. This man, the bishop smiled. Is it hard to understand? He slowly raised his hands, and countless faces contorted and deformed under his body. Many of the flesh protruded out, as if they had taken the form of human faces. They howled, bellowed, and begged for mercy, as if a myriad of ghosts had descended. I'm begging you, kill me, kill me. Someone, save my child. Boo-hoo. All sorts of voices rang out, from the elderly to the children, from men to women. Just as Smiling Face was in a daze, the environment around him changed drastically. It was as if countless black shadows of various sizes, old and young, had dashed out and grabbed onto his body. Some elderly people cried out as they grabbed onto his neck. Some children howled as they tried to hold onto his ankles. Some men bellowed furiously as they grabbed onto his arm. A myriad of ghostly shadows moved together, as if they wanted to drag him into the pitch-black door before him. At the next moment, the light and shadows changed, and Smiling Face saw clearly that the door was actually the bishop's body, which had countless tentacles twisting about. Smiling Face glared at the bishop, sending out waves of his martial will crazily, tearing the figures who had grabbed onto him into shreds. "What on earth have you done? What have I done? Do you still not understand, mortal?" The bishop laughed out loud. "We don't just have powerful physical bodies. I've also added in the consciousness of those ants, allowing us to be invincible in the battle of willpower impacts." Smiling Face suddenly turned and saw that the 3 gray knights, who had been bleeding from their 7 apertures, were now standing there unscathed. The lion head twisted his neck and said coldly, "Now, it's my turn to come out for a breather." The bodies of the 3 gray knights had been stuffed with countless human consciousnesses. When faced with the impact of the consciousnesses, it was just a matter of one dying in exchange for another. Seeing this, Smiling Face's voice turned cold. He stared at the bishop and asked, "How much consciousness did you stuff in? Oh, how many people did you kill? Oh, do confer knights care about the numbers of those ants?" The bishop shrugged. "But if you ask me, I really don't know. Do you remember what you had for breakfast yesterday, the day before yesterday, or even a month ago?" Violent Martial will shot out in all directions with Smiling Face as the center. The 3 gray knights let out agonizing cries under this gush of power. However, the bishop smiled and faced the gushing martial will. He used the commoner's consciousness in his body to fend off this impact. As long as the human lives in his body were not completely depleted, it was impossible for him to be defeated by the impact of martial will. Smiling Face looked at the bishop, and his heart gradually sank. Undying physically and undamaged mentally. "This is going to be troublesome." The bishop laughed maniacally and said, "Confer knights are able to perform willpower impacts because ordinary people don't know this technique. Then when you're facing the willpower impacts of several tens, several hundred, or even several thousand people, what would you feel? Enjoy it. Enjoy their pain." At the next moment, violent, turbulent currents of consciousness that were filled with all sorts of fury, despair, terror, and grief gushed out from the bishop's body. It was as if a myriad of ghosts had come out from the gates, and endless black shadows engulfed Smiling Face in that instant. Plates and Old Man looked at this scene in astonishment. However, the consciousness controlling the cells in their bodies had been killed by Smiling Face's willpower impacts. Thus, they stood up and got into battle stances. The bishop looked at this scene coldly, but his face was filled with disdain. He instructed, "Leave this to me. Number 1, go and capture the remaining 1." In the underground passageway, Fang Xingjian came to a large hall. The entire hall was filled with the stench of corpses. He walked quietly on a small path in the middle of the hall. The deep pits on both sides of the path were filled with countless white bones and rotten flesh. There were at least several thousand people who had died in the endless pit of corpses. Looking at the corpses everywhere, killing intent seemed to gather in Fang Xingjian's eyes. The mental cultivation method in his mind continued to circulate at an increasingly faster speed. Suddenly, a black shadow darted out from the pit. However, before he could get close, sword light flashed continuously, and 4 streams of blood splattered out from his body. He fell before Fang Xingjian. Fang Xingjian looked at the black shadow lying in a pool of blood, and the killing intent in his eyes grew even more intense. It was the body of a child who was 3 or 4 years old. However, the child's limbs had been replaced with dog legs, and his eyes and ears had been sewn up. Fang Xingjian could sense the madness and death intent from the other party, and he could clearly sense that the other party had completely gone mad. He casually sent out a series of sword light, killing the modified child. Fang Xingjian increased his pace, and the killing intent in his eyes grew even more intense. He continued to head deeper underground. However, wherever he passed by, long sword marks would unknowingly be left behind. It was as if there was an uncontrollable power that kept on surging out from Feng Xingjian's body. After passing through the mass grave in a tunnel that was over 1,000 meters long, the stench of blood assaulted his nostrils. What entered Feng Xingjian's eyes were countless naked men and women hanging from the ceiling of the cave. Each of them had various wounds on their bodies. Some had half their heads chopped off, while others had their limbs chopped off, and so on. Blood flowed on the ground, illuminating the entire hall in a blood-red color. Deathly aura emanated from Feng Xingjian's body, and the ground under his feet kept on shattering. It was as if there was a long sword slicing the ground. The killing intent in his eyes was like a raging gale, and he stepped on the viscous blood as he headed toward the center of the blood-colored hall. Along the way, other than seeing corpses hanging like dead pigs, Feng Xingjian could also see all sorts of torture devices. There were often remnants of fresh blood and minced flesh on them, and there were even corpses lying on them with terrified expressions on their faces. A series of sounds of knives being sharpened rang out from the depths of the hall. When Feng Xingjian arrived at the location where the sound were coming from, he saw a short human figure sitting there, focusing on sharpening a kitchen knife. A voice that was filled with neurosis kept on ringing out from the other party's mouth. Babies have the freshest and most tender flesh. It melts in one bite. The flesh of aristocratic ladies is the tastiest, and it tastes the best when served cold. The flesh of knights is the chewiest, and I always feel like roasting it. As Feng Xingjian's footsteps rang out, the short man slowly turned around. The kitchen knife in his hand slid across the whetstone, revealing an ugly face with contorted features and burns. Looking at Feng Xingjian, he chuckled, "There's meat to eat again." As he spoke, he could not help but drool from the corners of his lips. Chapter 377. Kacha-kacha sound kept on ringing out from the ground around Feng Xingjian. The viscous and dried blood seemed to have been swept by an invisible force, leaving behind inch-long marks on the ground. Feng Xingjian looked coldly at the Jura, as if he was looking at a pile of dead meat. He said coldly, "Did you kill all these commoners?" The short man revealed an expression of reminiscence as he said, "They're all gifts to the gods. Pain, despair, and grief. These are the only gifts we can give to the gods." He then licked his lips and said, "Then how would you like to die, warrior of the empire? Are you going to slice off your flesh bit by bit for me to eat? Or are you going to be fried in a pot of oil?" He circled around Feng Xingjian's body, his gaze filled with a maniacal look. "Or do you prefer to take it slow? Shall we rip off your limbs first? Or tear off your legs?" Feng Xingjian merely asked coldly, "Which faction are you mages from? You can sacrifice pain in exchange for the evil god's power? To think that you dare to call the god an evil god. What a heinous crime." The short man revealed an enraged expression. "Unforgivable, unforgivable. I'm going to pull out your tongue and feed it to the dogs later." As he spoke, he continued to stab into his body with the kitchen knife. As his body was sliced open time and time again, an excited expression appeared on his face. "God, please forgive his ignorance." This short man was clearly the interrogator in this base. He was in charge of torturing the kidnapped commoners and sacrificing their pain to the evil god to activate black magic. The remnant corpses and consciousness would then be used to synthesize and modify warriors like the Grey Knights. This was black magic that was unique to the gray-robed mages. Although Feng Xingjian did not know the entire process, he could guess that the other party's actions were definitely related to black magic. He had heard that a small portion of black magic in Demonic City was extremely cruel. They used extremely bloodthirsty and vicious methods in exchange for power from the evil god. He had not expected to see it here. His voice was like the cold Siberian wind as he said coldly, "One last question. Are you afraid of pain?" Just as the shorty was stunned for a moment, over 20 streams of ether sword ripples slashed onto his body. In that instant, fresh blood splattered, as if a red firework had exploded. It's useless. Her body had clearly been cut into dozens of pieces, but under Feng Xingjian's slightly surprised gaze, Shorty's body slowly merged back together, once again forming her original appearance. Looking at Feng Xingjian's slightly surprised gaze, a terrifying smile appeared on Shorty's face. This is the power that God has bestowed upon us. He has bestowed upon us an immortal body. Heretic, feel the terror of God. As he spoke, his entire body suddenly swelled up. His outer human skin was completely torn apart, and his entire body swelled up into a gray insect that was 3 meters tall and 6 meters long. His entire body was covered in segmented arms. The fat on Buggy's body trembled as he laughed wildly. Are you afraid? Fear? Resist? Or escape? Faced with an unkillable enemy, what on earth do you plan to? A soft swoosh rang out, and sword light swept across Buggy's body. With an explosive sound, the huge bug was slashed into 2 halves from the left and right. At the next moment, the zenith light sword formation was activated, and a stream of light swords swept out, heating up the bug's flesh into charcoal. Ah! Agonizing cries rang out from the huge bug's body. The 2 halves of the bug dragged its body and dashed out. Not only did they shed off the charred parts like they were molting, but they also crazily engulfed the corpses and the surroundings, infecting the cells of the corpses, converting them, and turning them into a part of themselves. It's useless. Do you think that you can burn us to death just by heating them up? You're dreaming. Sensing that its injuries were continuously recovering, the huge bug laughed out loud. Feng Xingjian looked at the huge bug that was engulfing its flesh and let out a cold snort. The zenith light sword formation was activated at full power, and 6 light spots expanded simultaneously, turning into 6 light swords that headed toward the huge bug. How terrifying was the prowess of the light swords that had a range of over 20 kilometers. Moreover, the zenith light sword formation shot out light at light speed. There was no way for the huge bug to dodge the zenith light sword formation's attacks. Wherever the 6 light swords passed by, regardless of whether it was steel, corpses, or walls, they would all be slashed into 2. They struck the huge bug's body, heating it up crazily and cutting up its flesh. The temperature in the air kept on rising, and wherever the light swords passed by, the huge bug's body would instantly be carbonized. It would then swell up and be sliced up, and new flesh would be carbonized. Simultaneously, under the high temperature, the blood kept on evaporating. Even when the light swords passed by its brain, the brain would start to boil and burn. At the beginning, the huge bug was still able to hang on, shedding its skin and engulfing other bodies to replenish its flesh and blood. However, very soon, its regeneration was no longer able to keep up with the destruction caused by Feng Xingjian's zenith light sword formation. The huge bug fell to the ground and spun around crazily, struggling and crying out agonizingly. Feng Xingjian walked toward the huge bug, whose body was continuously being burned into charcoal, and said coldly, "It seems that you're still afraid of pain. These monsters could reassemble and cut up their own bodies." However, they were not immune to burns, which destroyed all their cells. Moreover, compared to being slashed by blades and stabbed by swords, the pain of being burned, vaporized, and carbonized was hundreds or even thousands of times more painful. Very soon, the agonizing cries turned into pleas for mercy. "Stop! Stop it! I beg of you!" Feng Xingjian let out a cold laugh. Where did your god go? The zenith light sword formation was activated at full power, and light surged, almost encompassing the entire remaining bug's corpse. When the light gradually dissipated, all that was left was a half-melted, lava-like ground. However, at the next moment, Feng Xingjian's smile faded. A loud rumble rang out from his left. A lion-headed man darted to a distance of 10 meters to his left, and its claws swept out like huge axes. However, they collided fiercely with an ether sword ripple and were sent flying out with a bang. Feng Xingjian stood there without moving, watching coldly as the lion-headed man dashed toward him, only to be sent flying back by the ether sword ripple. The Level 6 Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar Mental Cultivation Method provided Feng Xingjian with 3 times the strength of the Ether Sword Ripple. Right now, Feng Xingjian's strength attribute was at 182 points. How terrifying would his strength be after being 3 times the strength attribute? The lion-headed man was sent flying, crashing into the wall and sinking deep into it. Then he spurted out a large mouthful of blood. With a single attack, all the bones in his body had shattered, and all his internal organs had turned into minced meat. He looked at Feng Xingjian in disbelief, gritted his teeth, and said, "What on earth is this strength of yours?" Feng Xingjian walked up to him slowly and said calmly, "And what the hell are you?" Seeing that the lion-headed man wanted to struggle, the zenith light sword formation shot out toward his body. The speed of light was not something that the lion-headed man could dodge. Therefore, endless agonizing cries rang through the entire hall. Chapter 378. Roar. Amidst the lion's roar, the earth trembled and the lion man's tremendous strength gushed out. His eyes turned red, and green veins popped up on his forehead. Unleashing all of his strength, he pushed against the zenith light sword formation and charged to a distance of 3 meters before Feng Xingjian. As his body structure was different from that of an ordinary human body, the strength he unleashed now surpassed 180 points in his strength attribute. It was an intense burst that could overturn over 10 tanks. The air in the surroundings seethed crazily, as if an air bomb had been ignited. However, even though such a monstrous force was unleashed in that instant, he was still pushed to a distance of 3 meters before Feng Xingjian. Bang! A stream of ether sword ripples slashed against his chest. However, the lion man's eyes only turned increasingly redder and his expression increasingly savage. He pushed against the ether sword ripples inch by inch. The invisible ether sword ripples seemed to reveal their form under this pressure. They were like invisible sharp blades in the air, flashing with a transparent glow. Feng Xingjian continued to stand there without moving. He merely let out a cold snort as he looked at the lion man with bloodshot eyes and continued to bellow furiously. At the next moment, another 5 streams of ether sword ripples shot out. A total of 6 streams of sword ripples slashed against the lion man's body. Not only was he instantly dismembered, but his corpse was also sent flying by the power that was as great as the mountains and seas, once again smashing against the mountain walls. The zenith light sword formation followed. This time around, the temperature was even higher, and it started to vaporize the lion man's body. Roar, 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 roar. With each furious bellow and attack, the lion man displayed an extraordinary vitality. However, no matter how he attacked, the moment he got near Feng Xingjian, he would be sent flying by the ether sword ripples. Seeing that his body was being vaporized incessantly, the lion man let out a furious bellow. What was left of his body swelled up like a balloon and then exploded. Countless amounts of blood and flesh splattered out in all directions. A large portion of them even dashed toward Feng Xingjian. It was not that they had never encountered experts who possessed powerful flames or thunderbolts that could destroy cells. However, at the end of the day, their undying bodies were only a means to ensure that they could continue battling. It was not the key to victory. The method that the lion man and the others truly relied on to win was the cell erosion. With just a little bit of contact, they would be able to corrode the body from the cellular level. This corrosive ability was extremely powerful and fast, and even a level 25 conferred knight like the lady in plates would not be able to fend it off. It was because the nature of their cells was different from that of humans. It was just like how white blood cells were unable to kill cancer cells. This was an intrinsic advantage. Even if a level 25 conferred knight was able to control the cells in his body, as long as he was unable to change the nature of the cells, he would only have a slightly stronger resistance. Seeing his own flesh and blood flying toward Feng Xingjian, the Leo man laughed maniacally in his heart. Just a little bit, just a little bit. Even if it's a small piece of flesh, a drop of blood, a little bit of blood cell, as long as I can touch you. However, at the next moment, the 6 light spots of the zenith light sword formation blocked in front of Feng Xingjian. The 6 light swords continuously spun 360 degrees and swept out, turning into 6 light shields that protected Feng Xingjian's entire body. Zenith light sword formation, light shield form. The high temperature of over 10,000 degrees Celsius boiled the air in the surroundings, and all the flesh and blood that shot toward Feng Xingjian were instantly vaporized and evaporated. In the end, the Leo man was left with only his head. However, in that instant, a pair of hands and feet grew out from under his head. He was like a strange, mutated creature, and with a leap, he wanted to pounce toward the corpse at the side, infect the corpse, and reconstruct his body. However, he had been unable to break through Feng Xingjian's obstruction even when he was at his peak condition earlier, let alone now. A foot descended from the sky and stomped down on the Leo man's head. Damn it! The Leo man glared at Feng Xingjian. At the next moment, countless flesh spikes grew out from his cheeks, wanting to pierce through Feng Xingjian's shoes and into his feet. However, at the next moment, Feng Xingjian's legs flashed past like illusions. Then he exerted force and kicked the Leo man out like he was kicking a ball. B** starred. Being kicked out like a ball by the other party made him extremely angry. The Leo man was left with only his head, and under his head were his hands and feet, which were only the size of his nose and eyes. He looked like a demon from the legends. Feng Xingjian's cold voice rang out in his ears. From the start of the battle, you've been wanting to come into contact with my body. Are you like that bug, able to absorb other people's bodies? The Leo man was slightly stunned. He had not expected Feng Xingjian to be able to see through him so easily. However, how could he take the initiative to tell Feng Xingjian when he was at a disadvantage? It's fine if you don't tell me. I'll bring you to see your boss just like that. However, at the next moment, Feng Xingjian's silhouette flashed and appeared before him once again. With a kick, the Leo man's head shot out, and the Leo man kept rolling on the ground. Every time the Leo man stopped, Feng Xingjian would flash again and kick out again. B** star, what are you doing? Stop right now. The Leo man bellowed crazily, feeling as if his head had been smashed into paste. However, he was unable to stop Feng Xingjian's actions at all. In the hall of flesh and blood, smiling face, who was surrounded by countless human figures, grew increasingly weaker. He was like a candle flame that had been burnt out, as if he would disappear at any moment. After throwing a disdainful glance, the bishop turned his gaze to Plates, an old man, and walked over slowly. Hey, Plates, if you don't go all out now, it'll be too late. Plates revealed a conflicted expression that was a mixture of graveness and craziness. Go all out. Go all out. With a furious bellow, the auras on their bodies swelled up. In that instant, several tens to over 100 streams of aura rose up. Even if one looked at them with the naked eye, it was as if many dazzling stars had soared up into the sky. Oh, self-destructing specialty seeds? The bishop continued to look at their actions slowly, as if he was looking at 2 clowns. It's a pity that the 2 of you have no idea what kind of existence you're going up against. After a Confer Knight reached level 25, they will be able to control their cells and modify their physical bodies, condensing the power from the essence of countless energies and flesh. This power was directly controlled by the Conferred Knight's consciousness and not their flesh and blood. Therefore, even if their flesh and blood were to be corroded, it could still be activated. A specialty would usually be able to increase a Conferred Knight's abilities in a certain aspect for the rest of his life. Due to the different difficulties in condensing a specialty seed, it would usually take several days or even several months of hard work, as well as the depletion of countless heavenly and earthly treasures. When this power was unleashed explosively in that instant, how terrifying would it be? Moreover, after the specialty seeds self-destructed, there was no way for them to recover. This meant that the 2 of them would never be able to reach the realm of perfection in condensing their specialties. Many light spots gradually lit up on the bodies of the two conferred knights. At the next moment, the two of them opened their mouths at the same time. Wind God, Flame God, the violent energy obtained from self-destructing specialty seeds seethed and seethed in their bodies. Then at the next moment, they respectively turned into the Wind God and Flame God killing techniques, turning into strong gales, tornadoes, and high-temperature flames. They mixed together and drowned out the bishop's body. In that instant, the firestorm engulfed the entire hall of flesh and blood. The intense high temperature seemed as if it was going to burn everything in the hall into ashes. Chapter 379. The flaming tempest gradually dissipated, and when the smoke cleared, two huge tentacles with a thickness of 5 meters appeared before Plates and Old Man. The tentacles extended out from void space, emitting a silver metallic glow and blocking off all of the flaming tempest. Only a small charred area was left on the surface of the tentacles, as if proving the existence of the previous round of attacks. It was the level 5 black magic, darkness tentacles. It could summon unidentified metallic creatures from another world and use their tentacles to attack and defend. The metallic tentacles twisted and retracted back into void space, revealing the bishop and the Grey Knight who were standing behind them. The bishop smiled and walked toward the two of them. "It's over? Was it fun?" Looking at the two of them who wore expressions of despair, he shook his head and said, "Pitiful mortals, you have no idea what you're going up against. The power that God has bestowed upon me is invincible. 25 years ago, if not for the church's interference and that damned silver-robed man, how could you mortals possibly have been able to defeat us?" With each step he took, the tentacles on his body continued to twist and extend, extending out toward Plates and Old Man. These extended tentacles were like many snakes, twisting their bodies and circling around the corroded bodies of the two conferred knights, binding them up one round after another. Just then, a loud collision sound rang out from afar. The bishop was stunned for a moment. "What's that?" Then another loud collision sound rang out. This time, it was even louder, as if it contained the agonizing cries and furious bellows of something. As if he had heard the sound clearly, the bishop frowned slightly. Then another collision sound rang out, and a black shadow darted out from the passageway, attacking the bishop. The Grey Knight, the man with snake heads, let out a roar and dashed out to block the bishop. All the power in his body burst forth, and he put out both his hands to fend off that black shadow. However, the moment he touched it, he felt a terrifying power being channeled into his body. As the mountain-like and ocean-like power came pouring down, he felt as if he had touched a mountain or a stretch of ocean. An explosive sound came from his body. The palm that came into contact with it shattered, and then the bones in his arms, elbows, and shoulders were broken one by one. His muscles were torn, and dozens of spurts of blood burst out from his arms. He let out a miserable howl and kept retreating until he crashed into the wall with the black shadow. Only then did he stop. That small lump of black shadow was the Lion Man's head. At this moment, the head had been kicked by a tremendous force into the Snake Head Man's body. The Snake Head Man's arms were completely shattered, and as he reassembled them, he looked in the direction of the passageway in shock. Just tossing the Lion Man's head over was enough to cause such terrifying damage. The other party's strength was unfathomable. Under everyone's surprised, puzzled, and curious gazes, Feng Xingjian walked in slowly. He looked at the two knights kneeling on the ground, as well as the unconscious smiling face who was kneeling on the ground in a daze. He then looked at the light in the sky, which was enveloped by black shadows. After looking at the two Grey Knights, the Boar-Bear Man and the Snakehead Man, Feng Xingjian turned his gaze toward the bishop, who had reached out his tentacles and was grabbing on a braid and Old Man. "It seems that you're the boss of the Serene Shrine stronghold?" The bishop blinked and then laughed at the next moment. "Ha ha ha. To think that I've also misjudged you. Amongst the 4 conferred knights, you're the strongest at level 24. To think that you're able to defeat number 1. It seems that you should be an important character in the Empire. Fang Xingjian looked at the three conferred knights' bodies that were kneeling on the ground and said, "Thanks to you for taking care of my companions. But I'd like to ask you some questions." "Haha, are these considered your last words before you die?" The bishop laughed, as if he did not care about Fang Xingjian's abilities at all. On the other side, the lion man's head kept on crying out agonizingly. It turned out that his head was gradually being assimilated into the snake head man's body, bit by bit. "No, don't eat me." The snake head man let out a hissing laugh. Number 1. The weak will join the strong, be engulfed by the strong, and then survive together. Isn't this our principle? Don't be afraid. Damn it. The lion man's face was filled with extreme panic, but he was unable to change the speed of the assimilation. In the blink of an eye, it was as if he had fallen into a swamp, assimilating into the snake head man's body. A hint of enjoyment appeared on the snake head man's face. However, at the next moment, he opened his eyes. He had already received the lion man's memories. Looking at Fang Xingjian, he said, "Lord Bishop, this guy is very powerful. His physical attributes are stronger than those three conferred knights, and he also has a type of light-type killing technique that can suppress our physical bodies. So that's how it is. Suppressing him? It's no wonder that he was able to defeat number 1. The bishop stroked his chin and looked at Fang Xingjian with an air of superiority, as if he was a god looking at a mortal. "Do you have any questions? Although you're still a mortal with your abilities, I can give you some respect." Fang Xingjian said slowly, "Are you a mage? The Terrene Shrine is conducting black magic experiments here? Those things up there, were they all done by you?" Hints of killing intent exuded from Fang Xingjian's body, and his mental cultivation method circulated increasingly faster, as if wanting to attain a breakthrough. The bishop was stunned for a moment, as if he had not expected Fang Xingjian to ask this question. He shrugged and said, "Are you talking about those studies? I did them. What's wrong?" "It's nothing. It's just that if I know, I'll feel even more exhilarated when I chop you up later." As he spoke, Fang Xingjian opened up his 5 fingers, and a powerful geomagnetic energy seethed through the ground. A stone sword was forced out from the ground and landed in his palm. "Eh?" The bishop was stunned for a moment, but at the next moment he laughed out loud. "So that's how it is. You're still a guy filled with a sense of justice. How boring. I hate people like you who think that you're infallible the most. You have no idea what kind of pain you'll be going through. I know that you conferred knights are all people with steel-like wills. Do you think that you're no longer afraid of any pain? But as long as you're human, it's impossible for you to not feel pain. The pain I get from torturing you guys will be even more pleasing to God than the pain I get from torturing ordinary people. I'll take good care of you." The bishop looked at Fang Xingjian with a gaze that was filled with hints of fury. It was as if he had overlapped with a silver silhouette from a certain memory in the past. The lady in plates bellowed, "Damn it! Cut the crap and escape quickly. This guy can't be killed." Old man also shouted, "You retreat first. Don't die here. Escape and call for reinforcements." Just as they were speaking, 6 light spots appeared behind Fang Xingjian and expanded in size. The Zenith Light Sword formation was activated. Under plates and old man's gazes of despair, violent light swords tore through the air and engulfed the bishop's head. Then with a flash, Fang Xingjian seemed to have become one with the sword, slashing out toward the bishop's heart. "Stop! Retreat quickly." The duo's marshal will carried all sorts of information and gushed out toward Fang Xingjian. It was as if they wanted to persuade him to retreat immediately. At the next instant, everyone felt that their bodies had become lighter. It was as if gravity had disappeared in that instant. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.